Okay, here we go. Okay, here we go. A single blue line meant she wasn't pregnant. Two meant she was. Dazed, Mia Trent stared at the dual thin blue lines coming through the small window of the narrow white stick. This was her third test. She had used up all the pregnancy tests available in the small pink box, including the bonus one. All read positive. She sat on the edge of the tub, not sure how to feel or what to think. She hadn't planned for. The loud knock on her apartment door jarred her out of her dazed thoughts. Oh God, Nate. She had forgotten she had invited him over for dinner tonight. She jumped up, stuffed all three tests back in the box, and tied them up in the pharmacy bag, then threw the bag under the sink. The knocking came again. She rushed to the front of her apartment, took a few deep breaths, trying not to look as frazzled as she felt before undoing the locks. At her door stood the love of her life, Nate MacArthur. He was handsome in his black windbreaker and dark jeans. The drizzle outside glistened on his mussed up chestnut brown hair, which added to his appeal. His dark brown eyes, however, were watchful and unwavering as he stared down at her. Nate had always been perceptive. Could he tell she was carrying his baby? What's wrong? He asked, his thick dark brows furrowing into a deep frown of concern. Everything and nothing, she thought. She wanted to say that, but she didn't trust her voice to speak, so she simply smiled, shook her head, and stepped back to let him in. Before she had the door closed, he had pulled her into a tight embrace. Burying her face against his chest, she wrapped her arms around his lean waist, holding him tight. She breathed in the light, intoxicating scent. His smell made her think of nutmeg and warm wood. A small smile graced her lips as the cocoon of his strong, inviting hold brought back a substance, a semblance of peace to her strained emotions. You sure you're okay? She smiled brightly up at him. Yeah, I'm better now. Good. He brought his mouth down to hers for a light, lingering kiss. His rich, heady taste always left her breathless, and before it ended, she was gripping fistfuls of his coat. He smiled softly and rubbed his thumb across her lower lip. So, what's for dinner? She looked up at him, contrite. She had promised him dinner tonight, but had completely forgotten to stop by the grocery store. Instead, her mind had been preoccupied with her trip to the drugstore. Nate smiled, laughed at her guilt-ridden face. It's cool. We can go out. How about Josie's? No, no, she said, pulling away from him. I can whip something up. Just give me a few minutes. She preferred to stay in and gather her courage so she could have her talk with him. Just the thought of broaching the subject left butterflies fluttering in her stomach. Nate followed her into the kitchen. Need any help? He offered. Leaning against the counter, she looked up at him incredulously. He laughed, remembering as she did the last time he tried to make her breakfast. She now only had two functional burners to cook with because of him. He had offered to pay for the repairs, but it wasn't anything her lazy super couldn't fix whenever he decided to get to it. She scanned her fridge and cabinets, but found nothing that would make a decent meal. Her food supply was pathetic. She pulled out what provision she did have. Okay, this is it, she said, holding up the pack of cheese and a jar of peanut butter. Grilled cheese or PB&J? Nate contemplated it for a second, making it if she had posed him with a different question. Grilled cheese, he finally said, and make mine a double. You got it. She whipped up a few simple grilled cheese sandwiches. He helped her by pulling off the wrappers from the cheese slices. When are you leaving for California? She asked, and she prepared the sandwiches, needing to temporarily distract her mind from the conversation they would soon have. Wednesday, he said, then he shot her a crooked grin. The invitation is still open, you know. Mia's lips quirked up. Nate had wanted her to come on his business trip with him so they could extend the trip and spend the weekend on the California coast together. His invitation was sweet, but he had forgotten to factor into her work and responsibilities. And what do I tell my boss? At the mention of his father, Nate lost his smile and she instantly regretted bringing him up. She hated when he got that cold look in his eyes. Nate always seemed to withdraw whenever she brought up his father, Charles MacArthur. They had only been dating for 6 months, though she had seen him at the office occasionally when he'd come to visit his father. At first, she had thought he hadn't particularly liked her since he had always been abrupt and cold towards her. But then she had soon discovered he got like that whenever he had to deal with his father. It had been during the company's Christmas party that she had found out how much he liked her. With stolen mistletoe, Nate had cornered her in a secluded area and kissed her until she had no breath left. She had thought it had been a silly and romantic gesture, but he had certainly gotten her attention. A soft smile touched her lips at the memory. After that night, Nate had been relentless in his pursuit. At first, she had avoided him because his father was her boss, but he had been so outrageously flirtatious and handsome. It had been hard not to let herself get swept away, though she had been uneasy at the idea of them getting together. She was glad she had ultimately given in. He made her happy. Finals are also coming in, she added. I can't afford to miss any more days, especially not after the week she had taken off to celebrate his 30th birthday this past April. Maybe next time, she offered. Yeah, maybe, he said with a listless smile, not looking at her. She sighed, unsure about her next move, though they decided to be discreet about their relationship. The past 6 months have been an intense, all consuming one, and somewhere during their time together, she had lost her heart to him. They may have moved fast in their relationship, but there was a connection between them she had never felt with another man ever. When the sandwiches were ready, they moved to the living room where they sat and ate in silence. She had found some leftover chips to add to their basic dinner, and he seemed to be enjoying the plain meal. Mia leaned against the other end of the small sofa with her socked foot draped over his lap, smiling as she watched him. He had removed his jacket, and his lean, muscular frame was well defined in the simple black t-shirt. The soft orange of the table lamp accentuated his black Irish features. He seemed perfectly at ease, sitting here in a small, modest apartment. Despite his affluent background, Nate didn't flaunt his wealth, though she loved how he took every measure to minimize the social class lines between them. None of that mattered to her. She loved him, not his things, and he knew that. Yes, he knew she loved him. She had told him twice, though both times had been after their lovemaking. He hadn't returned the words, but she wasn't discouraged because he showed her in so many other ways. Their relationship had taken on a new, heightened intensity she couldn't explain. He had to feel the same way about her, even if he wasn't ready to say the words. He glanced at her when she continued to stare at him, her half-eaten sandwich growing cold on her plate. What? He asked. Do I have crumb on my face? And she smiled softly and shook her head. Then why aren't you eating? He asked. It's actually pretty good. She laughed. You can't go wrong with grilled cheese. Well, maybe you can, she laughed, loud as his embellished, hurtful expression. I'm teasing you. It's sexy when you try to cook. She put her plate down and turned back to him. I'm just not that hungry. And she was thinking, I'm actually feeling a little nauseous. But she couldn't tell him that. Not yet, anyway. The stomach clenched at the thought of their impending discussion. Nate finished the last of his sandwich and she got up to take their place into the kitchen. She started washing the few dishes they dirty, not wanting them to sit overnight, which would happen if she didn't get it done now. As she rinsed the last dish, she jumped when strong arms suddenly wrapped around her middle. Sorry, Nate whispered into her ear. I didn't mean to scare you. I thought you heard me. She turned off the running water and leaned against him. No, I was lost in my head. What did you say? He leaned down and kissed her on the back of her neck, and she shivered. No matter where or how many, his kiss always left her lightheaded. I asked, what's for dessert? He repeated, kissing her again. She turned in his arms, laughing. That's so cliche, you know. What do you mean? He asked with mock disbelief. She rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You say, what's for dessert? Then I say something ordinary, and then you say something cheesy like wanting me for dessert. He looked down at her thoughtful. That does sound like something I'd say, but this hungry man could actually still eat. Oh, she said, a little embarrassed by her rash assumption. He was serious. Nate wasn't a small guy and could honestly still be hungry. Well, she began lamely, I don't have anything else to feed you. Nate's eyes sparkled. Yeah, you do, he whispered. He placed his hand on the center, either side of her, trapping her between his solid frame and the sink. I said I could still eat. She paused, confused. Then she laughed, recognizing the heated suggestion in his eyes. You're bad, she murmured, shuddering lightly at his hard chest. He leaned in closer, his lips only a breath away from hers. And you like it. The brush of his lips was searing. She fell against him, seeking out his mouth and the warm magic of his kiss. He tasted better than any meal she could have made. The soft bite of his teeth made her tingle all over. She was hungry for more. But the sudden rolling in her stomach took her by surprise. She shoved him away as the familiar clenching in her throat seized her. Bolted into the bathroom, she expelled the little food she had in her stomach. Oh, how embarrassing. She rinsed her mouth and splashed cool water on her face. The brown, narrow features staring back at her from the vanity mirror looked stark and miserable. With her hair pulled back and a loose ponytail, her dark eyes eclipsed her slender face. She looked as pathetic as she felt. She emerged from the bathroom to find Nate sitting on the couch. He looked up at her, frowning with concern. You okay? Yeah, she said, falling into the seat beside him. I think I'm getting too old to eat such fine cuisine like chips and grilled cheese. She leaned against his side, and he wrapped his arm around her, placing a chaste kiss on her forehead. I thought that stomach bug was gone, he said. She forgot she had mentioned her bouts of nausea to him when they had begun. She had initially thought her sudden bouts of nausea had come from something she had eaten. It was only recently, when it hadn't gone away and she had missed her last period, that she had started to suspect. I thought so too, she said simply. Do you need me to get you anything? She shook her head. I took something, she lied. They cuddled on the couch, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, and she was content to just sit there, savoring his warmth. She only had thought, she had only, uh, I'm sorry, my tongue got twisted here. She only had tonight before he left for California for the rest of the week. She couldn't wait until he got back from his trip to tell him. Yet she was in no rush to have that conversation. This wasn't something they had planned, and it certainly wasn't something they had ever discussed. They often used protection, but clearly their methods had not been successful this time around. She could only hope he would be happy to find out he would soon become a father, maybe even offer marriage. It was old fashioned of her, but she would like to think that he wouldn't want to raise a child out of wedlock. They had never talked about their future in that regard since their relationship was still budding, and she hadn't wanted to raise the subject prematurely. His parents, however, were married, although not quite happily, but Nate knew she valued stability and fidelity in a relationship. Nate? Mm-hmm, he murmured lazily, rubbing his hands over her lower back. It felt nice. She took a steady in breath. Where do you see us 5 years from now? His slow movement stopped, and his muscle tensed beneath her. After a short pause, he asked, what do you mean? I mean us, as a couple. Are we still together? Are we friends? She hesitated before adding, are we married? He went rigid. The silence in the room was deafening. She pulled away from him and sat up to look at him. She wished she hadn't. That cold, distant look was back in his eyes. Her heart sank. Why are you asking me that? He probed in a slow, low voice. The sudden change in him was alarming, and for a minute, she didn't know how to respond. I I was just curious. You know I love you, and I want to have a future with you. He leaned forward and ran his hand through his hair. He didn't look at her when he said, I'm not marrying you. For a moment, she didn't realize what she had heard. Then his words sank in, and a sharp pain pierced through her heart. He turned to look back at her, and he must have seen the hurt in her eyes because his face softened slightly. It's not that I don't want to marry you, he said. I'm not marrying anyone. I'm just not the marrying type. But I thought you, don't you care about me? She couldn't ask him if he loved her. She refused to. If he did, it was up to him to tell her. You know I do, and I'm happy with how things are between us. Marriage will only mess things up. It certainly didn't do any good for my parents. She looked at him searchingly, trying to understand the source of his bitterness. She didn't know much about his family because he kept a lot of that to himself. From what Mia had gathered, his parents' marriage had been one of convenience. Had they not grown to love each other? Nate had developed into a good man with both his parents in his life, and she couldn't understand why that wouldn't be something good, something to vie for. Besides, she loved him, and he had to love her too, so it would be different for them, wouldn't it? Don't you want children? She finally asked quietly. No, he said without hesitation. She looked away, her hopes and dreams shattered with that single word. How could they be so right for each other in every way but this? Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them away. But what if I got pregnant? She whispered, turning back to him. Nate regarded her with plenty dark eyes. I won't be forced into marriage. She winced at his curt tone, then looked away. She took a deep breath and clenched her hands together to stop the trembling. Gathering her strength, she forced a strained smile on her quivering lips. I would never force you to do anything you didn't want to, Nate, she whispered, and I certainly wouldn't trick you into marrying me. She glanced over at him. His eyes were intense and fierce, but she held his hard gaze. So where does that leave us? He asked quietly. She stood up and went to grab his jacket. She was moving without feeling and grateful for the numbness that now encased her. She walked back to where he sat and held it out to him. Maybe we should take a break and think about what we want from this relationship. Nate looked at the jacket in her hand, then back up at her. So that's how you're playing it? I either promise to marry you or we're through. I'm not giving you an ultimatum, Nate. I'm giving you a choice. He bounded to his feet so fast she was startled into taking a step back. He grabbed her arm and drew her so close to him that a pin couldn't pass between them. Life's not a fairy tale, Mia. He bit out inches from her face. I'm not your Prince Charming, and there's no such thing as forever after. There's only here and now. It's happily ever after, she murmured absently. He cursed, then released her. He snatched the jacket from her left hand and jerked it on. Mia, do yourself a favor and get your head out of the clouds, he snapped. I know what I want, but I won't be manipulated into having you. His words hurt because if he thought she would resort to such tactics just to keep him, he would be sadly mistaken. Obviously, he didn't know her as well as she had hoped. Trust me, she whispered. You won't have to worry about that. He stared down at her long and hard. Without a word, he slammed out of her tiny apartment. Wow, okay. She wasn't expecting that. Nate had arrived in California in a bad mood and would leave it with a splitting headache. He sat at the hotel bar, cradling his third drink between his palms. His trip to California had been a waste. The distribution company he had come to check out in the hopes of financing had turned out to be a bust. They were less structured and efficient than they presented themselves to be. Nate had canceled their final meeting and made arrangements to fly back to Chicago first thing tomorrow morning, then meet with his father that afternoon. He clenched his jaw tight. He hated being summoned, and his father knew it. The first half of his life had been spent with a father who seemed to take pleasure in undermining him when he wasn't ignoring him, and with a mother who, when she was around, treated him like a burden. Nate eventually learned to keep his distance until his father demanded his presence or found some use for him. Normally, he would prolong his father's request for a meeting, but since he was leaving California early anyway, Nate decided to get their meeting over with. But if he was completely honest with himself, Nate would admit that he craved to see her, which was really why he wanted to be back in Chicago. Tonight, however, he wasn't in the mood for Honesty's company. She was the one who had given him the ultimatum, had suggested they take a break. Now she would have to be the one to come to him if she wanted them to be together. He downed the rest of his drink and ordered another. His pathetic attempt to forget about Mia for just one night was not working. The more he drank, the more he thought about her. So tonight, he would indulge. I won't be responsible for what happens to you if you keep that up, Fred Carlson said, staring pointedly at his drink. Nate turned to his lawyer and longtime family friend with a smirk. I thought I told you to take the night off, Fred. Fred sat on a stool beside him. I haven't taken a night off since I started working for you and your father. Why start now? Nate grunted. Then in that case, have a drink with me. Nate ordered 2 shots and slid one to the older man. But Fred continued to stare at him in a way that made him feel like a defiant little boy. Nate raised his glass in salute and tossed back his drink. Fred's graying brows furrowed. Nate, I've known you long enough to know you only drink like this after an argument with your father. But since you've been with me all day, there's something else making you act like an ASS. Nate turned away from Fred's concerned face. Fred was the only man in his life that he had been able to count and rely on. At 12 years old, Fred had come into his life and shown him what it was like to have someone pay attention to him. He hadn't looked through him or ignored him as his parents had. As Nate grew into manhood with his own dreams and ambitions, Fred had become his close friend and advisor and an integral part in helping him establish himself as an angel investor. Fred had understood his need for independence from his father and the family business, and with Fred's help, Nate had gone on to make some lucrative investments. During this wasted trip, Fred had learned about a technology company that had showed promise and could potentially be another profitable opportunity. An informal lunch meeting with the founder of Mercury Horizons was already scheduled for early next week. But tonight, Nate didn't want any advisement, and he certainly didn't need Fred to make him feel even more stupid than he already did. Stupid for thinking he could actually be happy. Are you and Mia having problems? Fred asked. I've been with you for 2 days and you haven't mentioned her once. Nate didn't want to talk about Mia. He couldn't remember the last time another woman, other than his mother, made him feel abandoned. He was hurt, and the alcohol was a soothing, numbing balm. Good night, Fred, he said, reaching for the untouched glass that sat between them. Fred pulled it away. It's a wonder you and Charles don't get along, he snapped. You're as bullheaded as he is, but more pathetic. Nate's jaw clenched. Fred knew all the right buttons to push. Nate flashed his friend a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And like him, I pay you for your legal advice. Nothing else. Certainly not any of your fatherly advice. Fred stared at him blankly and said nothing. Nate cursed. Even in his alcohol-induced state, he knew he had crossed the line. Fred and his wife had spent years trying to have a baby until they had eventually stopped trying. There had been a time long ago where Nate had secretly wished he had been Fred's son. Now, because of his stupidity and careless tongue, he had unintentionally opened up old wounds. Listen, Fred. No, you listen, he interrupted. Want some legal advice? Here it is. Man up and get over yourself. Whatever it is that's bothering you, which I'm guessing is your girlfriend, you need to deal with it and quick. Either call her or get over her. Turning into a drunken ASS isn't doing you any favors, and it would be a blank shame to see what little you built up go to blank because you couldn't practice some self-control. Fred got up and slid the shot glass to him, the contents sloshing dangerously close to the edge. And that little legal advice is on the house, Fred retorted as he walked past him. Nate looked down at the brown liquid, then pushed the glass aside as Fred's parting words ran through his muddled brain. Fred was right. He had to deal with this or end up drinking himself into a stupor each night. It had only been 2 days, yet he missed her greatly. A part of him wanted nothing more than to call her, to hear her voice. Mia had been like no other woman he had dated before. She was sweetness and sass all wrapped into a sexy feminine frame, despite her flair for the romantic, which he had found endearing on occasion. She had been his dream girl. Obviously, what they had wasn't enough for her, though. He should have known she would eventually expect the white dress and diamond ring, but he had hoped she'd be more practical and sensible. They were happier than any married couple he knew, and she knew far more single and divorced people than he did, which should have been enough to show her the insignificance of marriage. Her irrationality aggravated him. If she thought he'd agree to marriage and enter into the kind of arrangements his parents had been in for 30 years, she would be greatly disappointed. In a way, it was a good thing that this all had come out now before he had gotten in any deeper than he already was, he reminded himself. The numbness of the alcohol was wearing off, but he wanted nothing more than to rest his fuzzy yet crowded mind. Nate paid his tab, leaving the still full shot glass untouched. He managed to make it back to his room without faltering, though it took effort. He and Fred had to be up early for their flight tomorrow, and he would have to think of the apology he owed his friend. But first, he needed to work on Marion, images of large chocolate brown eyes and soft, full lips to the deepest part of his mind. Mia bit down on her lower lip as she lay on the vinyl clinic bed, wearing nothing but the thin pink gown the nurse had handed her. She waited for her doctor to probe her with the uncomfortable looking instrument. She looked away and her eyes fell on the illustrated poster of a woman in various stages of her pregnancy. The drawing had an image of what a fetus looked like as it developed each month. The image of the barely developed fetuses with the underdeveloped features held her captivated. Was that how their baby looked right now? She unconsciously placed her hand over her belly. If she had to guess, she would say she was about 6 to 8 weeks pregnant. It must have happened sometime during the week she and Nate had spent in Galena for his birthday. They had rented a vacation home, and sometime during that week, they had made this baby. But Mia couldn't regret that moment. It had been an unforgettable time that had resulted in an unexpected gift. This is an ultrasound transducer, Dr. Erica Ellis explained, drawing her attention back to the long white narrow device she held. It's used for transvaginal ultrasound, which is going to help us determine your due date and make sure everything's in working order for you and the baby. Mia flinched when the doctor inserted the cold object inside her. She looked away, wanting more than anything for Nate to be by her side. Instead, he was 2 time zones away. Seeing as their relationship was coming to an end, what she wanted didn't matter. A small part of her had hoped he would realize his mistake and come running back to her. or at least call. He did neither. It was Thursday, 3 days since he had left her apartment, and she was fast losing her illusion that he was interested in having a future with her. Her throat tightened as sadness washed over her. What should have been a joyful occasion in her life only left her feeling miserable and alone. She had always dreamed of sharing this moment with her husband, to have him hold her hand, smiling with joy as they looked at their new baby forming. Instead, at 24, she was facing motherhood on her own. No husband, no Nate. She couldn't stop the sheen of tears that filled her eyes. Her mother had struggled to raise her and her sister alone, and Mia had not wanted the same thing to happen to her. Mia, are you okay? She nodded, smiling through her tears. Yes, I think it's just the hormones. Dr. Ellis nodded in understanding. The older black woman was serene and graceful, her movements unhurried. Her black hair was pulled into a severe bun at her nape, but her smile was relaxed and gentle, which helped ease some of Mia's discomfort. You hear that? She asked in a whisper. That's the baby's heart beating. Mia looked at the black and white grainy movement on the screen beside her. She held her breath and listened. At the sound of the soft, pulsing beat, her sadness and misery immediately fell away. As Dr. Ellis walked her through every little movement, Mia stared at the small life form budding inside her, a life she and Nate had created. Though her heart ached for the man she loved, it also filled with a love so strong, a protection so fierce, it literally took her breath away. She would do whatever she needed to do for this baby. Thankfully, the invasive exam didn't take as long as she had expected, and soon Dr. Ellis was done with her probing. Mia sat up, tugging a thin gown down. As she suspected, Nate had gotten her pregnant during their week together in Galena. She was about 8 weeks pregnant, and if everything went well, she should have her baby in her arms in January. Oh, wow. So that means she got pregnant about the same time as I did because my baby was due in January too. And that's when I had him. You and the baby look to be in good health, Dr. Ellis began, but the first trimester can be the most vulnerable for new mothers. So I want you to be very careful. The doctor ran off a list of foods and exercises she would need to begin doing, then handed her a list of recommended prenatal vitamins. If you have any questions, call me. Even if you start to worry or wonder about something, just call me. Mia nodded, but at Dr. Ella's words, anxiety started to plant itself in her. Scenarios of all the things that could go wrong invaded her thoughts, and they all scared her. Dr. Ellis must have sensed her fear because she patted her shoulder reassuringly. I'm sure everything will be fine. You're young and healthy, and you have a great doctor, she said with a wink. Mia returned a smile, but it was half-hearted as the reality of her situation came crashing down on her. She was alone in this city and about to raise a baby on her own. Her only family, which consisted of her mother and a little sister, was states away and in no position to help her. She didn't even think she would be able to continue working for Charles MacArthur, yet she couldn't afford to leave her job. Not now. And then there were her classes. A dull headache began to form, and she closed her suddenly teary eyes. It's too early to tell the sex, Dr. Ellis said, trying to distract her. But around your 12th to 14th week, you should be able to know. So I have to wait another month to find out. Dr. Ellis laughed. Believe me, the time will fly. Are you hoping for a boy or a girl? Mia thought for a moment and realized it didn't make a difference to her. She was already fiercely in love with her baby. No, not really. But I did grow up with a family of women, so I wouldn't mind a little boy. You may change your mind, Dr. Ellis said with a grin. I have three of my own, and with my husband, it's a wonder I haven't pulled all my hair out. She laughed. My mother just had me and my sister, and she would say the same thing. Yeah, there were times when I said that too, because I had those boys and my husband. Then we might be looking at your little girl. I grew up with three older brothers, and I sometimes wonder if my fourth child would have been a girl. But I'm not willing to take the chance of having to raise another little monster. And they both laughed. Do you have any names picked out yet? Dr. Ellis asked. She nodded, a soft smile on her lips. She spent years thinking of her future family and baby names picked out as far back as she could remember. If it's a girl, I was thinking of Maia, but spelled it Maia. That's the name my mother originally wanted for me, but supposedly the nurses got it wrong on the birth certificate. Maia, Dr. Ellis repeated, very pretty. And if it's a boy that looked like Nate, her heart lurched at the thought. I always liked the name Michael, she whispered dreamily, already imagining a soft, creamy brown faced baby with dark, wavy hair. Or would it be curly? She shook her head, laughing at herself. Those little details didn't matter. She just couldn't wait to hold her baby in her arms. It was finally Friday, and Mia was grateful. The long week was coming to an end. It had been her most frustrating, draining week by far. The past few days, she had found it hard to concentrate, even on the simplest of tasks, and making the most ridiculous mistakes, which Charles MacArthur was not shy about pointing out to her. She nearly ruined his international travel plans for next week. There was an important summit happening in Belgium next week, and he was supposed to arrive there next Tuesday. Instead, his flight itinerary had read he would be arriving in Chicago that day. She was grateful the travel agency had called to confirm, which had given her plenty of time to fix a colossal screw up. In the 2 years she had worked for Charles, she had made it a point to be extremely careful around him. He was a shrewd man who demanded excellence, and Mia tried to meet his expectations. It didn't help, though, that her boss reminded her regularly of Nate. Just working with him, having to look at him every day, made her heart twist. Charles' features were older, more mature, and his dark hair was peppered with grays, but the resemblance between him and his son was unmistakable. Only Nate's eyes were less shrewd and his jaw less blunt. That, however, didn't excuse her carelessness, and she wasn't surprised when an impatient Charles eventually voiced his irritation. Mia, what happened to my 4 o'clock? I asked you to set that up 2 days ago. She scanned over her computer, which toggled his searching for the meeting she could have sworn she set up the night before. I'm sorry, she stammered. It should be here. Well, it's not. or else I wouldn't be asking. Now, did you schedule it or not? I can't seem to find it, she replied helplessly. Then she found it, and the breath was wrenched out of her chest. She had scheduled a meeting for the following Friday. This was the third time this week she had misscheduled something. Only those other meetings hadn't been quite so urgent. If Charles' patience with her hadn't already reached the breaking point, it would now. Mr. MacArthur, I'm sorry, but I just realized I have it scheduled for next Friday. I'll send out a new invite now, though it would be a challenge getting anyone to a meeting a couple of hours before it was supposed to begin. Charles let out a heavy sigh, his lips pressed firmly together. This meeting is very urgent, and I need to have it today. Of course, I'll start calling everyone on the list now. Unfortunately, Mia hit a roadblock. They were either not available, had other urgent meetings that conflicted, or had already left the office for the day. She called up other executive assistants, and there was no room on anyone's schedule to work around. Even Charles' calendar was booked until 6 that evening. If he expected her to pull a miracle, he was in for a disappointment. The earliest she could get this meeting scheduled was first thing Monday morning, something he would not be happy about. She stood in his office explaining that to him, but by the end, Mia couldn't muster the energy she needed to care. Getting coffee, scheduling meetings, and booking travel were trivial compared to the issues swarming in her mind as of late. I invited my son to this meeting, Charles said, displeasure evident on his weathered face. But seeing as it's not going to happen, you'll need to call and tell him it's been rescheduled. Mia froze as the bottom dropped in her stomach. She didn't want to call Nate. She didn't think she could force professional indifference in her tone. Not when she missed him so much. But she didn't need to. To both their surprise, Nate walked into his father's office just as she was thinking of an excuse to give Charles for the reason she would not be able to make the call. She turned at the sound of his confident steps as he strode into his father's office. They stared at each other, and at that moment she forgot all about her boss. Nate came to a sudden stop, but his expression softened as he stared down at her. Her heart tingled and she exhaled, her lips parted slightly. He always looked good in a suit. Seeing him again made her acutely aware of how much she still loved and missed him. She wanted to go to him, but held back, not because of their one man audience, but because she wanted him to come to her. Pride was a treacherous snake, even as it offered a small sense of righteous comfort. It camouflaged true desires and wants only to later strike the heart with poisonous despair and loneliness. Wow, that's a lot to say. Okay. It was easier to uphold that pride when she wasn't steps away from him. He started toward her, his eyes bright and intense. She inhaled sharply, but before he could reach her, Charles' hard tone stopped him. Nathan, you're early. Nate held her gaze for a moment longer before he turned to his father. I thought you'd appreciate that. Charles looked from her to his son, then back to her. His hard stare bore into hers, and she had to glance away. Was she wearing her heart on her sleeve? Could Charles see? She hoped not. There's been a slip up, so the meeting's been rescheduled. But since you're here, I might as well debrief you. Mia, be sure to add Nate to the meeting on Monday. She couldn't yet find her voice, so she nodded, not looking at either man. It was vain of her, but she suddenly wished she had worn something more alluring than the plain black skirt and light pink top. She jotted down the reminder in her notepad just to keep her fingers busy, but couldn't even read what she wrote. I also want you to send out a memo to everyone on the meetings. Charles gave her the message, and Mia tried her best to capture the essentials, but she could barely concentrate. Nate's eyes hadn't moved away from her. Even as she jotted her notes down, she could feel them on her. Did you get all that? Charles asked, breaking the invisible chain that kept her attention wholly bound to Nate's very presence. She nodded. Charles regarded her intensely. Then repeat back what I just said. Mia's mind went blank, humiliated by his request. She looked down at her notepad, trying to make sense of her writing. She's got it, Nate cut in, his tone hard. Now let her get back to work. Mia glanced over at him, surprised but grateful to him for coming to her defense. She was used to Charles' condescending barbs, and any other time she could have handled it, but not today, not in front of Nate. Charles shot his son a hard glare, then let out a heavy sigh with exasperation. Just make sure the meeting is on everyone's calendar and the memo goes out tonight, he said to her. She cleared her throat. Yes, of course. She turned to leave. Nate's eyes followed her every step toward the door. Those few steps felt never ending, but eventually she was out of her boss's office and away from those piercing eyes. She sat at her desk and tried to ease the trembling in her stomach. It took a few minutes, but the quivering eventually passed. She glanced at Charles' closed door. She didn't want to miss Nate leaving, but she was called away from her desk, and when she returned, she found Charles' office door open and both men gone. Her shoulders slumped and she went back to her desk, trying to overcome her budding disappointment. But her disappointment swiftly turned into alarm when she received a call from Human Resources. They needed to meet with her right away. Mia took a steadying breath that did nothing to relieve her anxiety. This can't be good. And it wasn't. At 5 o'clock that Friday, she was fired from MacArthur, Murphy and Company. Mia, how could you let this happen? She held on to her patience as she sat beside her mother on the worn leather couch. With her feet tucked beneath her, she listened half-heartedly to her mother's words, wondering if she made the right decision by coming to Detroit this weekend. I can't help that Charles MacArthur is a blank, she wanted to inform her mother. The disgraceful manner in which Charles had her terminated made her want to cry, punch, and vomit all at the same time. He hadn't even had the decency to fire her himself. It was his company. If he didn't want her, he could have at least told her himself and spared her the humiliation of hearing from HR that her inability to fulfill her job requirements were not measuring up to the company's expectations. If their expectations were machine-like perfection, then she certainly didn't fit in. Mama, I'll find something else, she said, realizing she couldn't get the comfort or the backing she had hoped to get from her mother. Yvette Trent was too busy lecturing her on life and responsibility. MMC is not the only company in Chicago, and I'm sure I'll find something better, a place that respects and cares about their employees. Her mother huffed. What have I always told you, huh? When you work for other people, they don't care about your problems or your feelings. They're running a business, and you need to show them that you mean business. Mia sighed. She wouldn't argue with her mother because no matter what she said, her mother would never understand. She believed working to support herself and her family was the most important thing in life. Though her mother hadn't argued with her decision to go to law school, she would have preferred that if Mia had used her political science degree to find a steady job with a lucrative retirement package and savings plan. So, what are you going to do now? Her mother asked. Have you started looking for work? Well, I was fired yesterday, Mia said, unable to keep the exasperation from her voice. So, no. Then she glanced away and stared at her hands. But they offered me a severance package, she lied, so I can afford to take a few days off. Lying wasn't something Mia liked doing, but she didn't want her mother to worry. Yvette wasn't making much from the health clinic where she worked, but she would still feel compelled to lend her financial support. Why do you need time off? You'll have plenty of that if you don't start looking right now. A job isn't going to just land on your lap. Mia looked at her mother with concern. Mama, that cough doesn't sound good. Have you been to the doctor? It's nothing, she said, shaking her head. It's just a little thing. Don't worry about me. But Mia was worried. It had been 3 years since her mother had been diagnosed with that rare lung disease, but the doctors termed pulmonary sarcoidosis. It hadn't been there since her mother hadn't even been a smoker, but the doctors had stated that there wasn't a known cause for that type of lung disease. Unfortunately, her mother's case had also been one of rare, severe ones, but she had successfully completed her therapy and the disease had gone into remission. But Mia worried every time she had the slightest cough. She had done her own research and had found that there was no real cure or treatment for the lung disease. It could either stay in remission or flare up at any moment. Mia made a mental note to get her mother to a doctor's appointment. She didn't want her to have to worry about her, too. Don't look at me like that, her mother said. I'm fine. What I'm more concerned about is you in that city by yourself without a job. Mia shifted on the couch, drawing her legs closer. Please don't worry about that, Mama, she countered. It was for the best. She had to believe that or let the thought of her sudden unemployment overwhelm her. Some time off would help ease her mind of all her recent stressors. As of late, she repeated to herself, she would find something. She just had to stay positive. Before she embarked on the dreaded job search, however, she wanted to break the news to her mother in person that she would soon be a grandmother. She imagined her mother's disappointment, but soon it wouldn't be something she could hide. Even now, she was struggling to calm her queasy belly. By dinner, it was getting harder for her to hide her nausea, and every time her stomach churned, she thought of Nate. She had half expected to hear from him after yesterday, hoping he would reach out to her, but nothing. Her heart broke a little bit more with each passing day. She wondered if she had imagined the longing she read in his eyes when they had been in his father's office. She didn't have time to wallow in self-pity, though. She had to come to terms with the fact Nate wouldn't be holding her hand at doctor appointments. She wasn't going to get the husband, the house, or the white picket fence. The sooner she accepted that, the better off she'd be. Mia, why aren't you eating? Her mother asked. She looked up from her plate and into her mother's concerned face. Curry chicken was her favorite, but just the smell of the spicy, sweet sauce upset her stomach. She had to ask her mother to brew some of her special ginger tea, but that didn't seem to be helping her. She was starting to realize part of her upset stomach was largely due to her nerves. She was waiting for the next time to tell her mother about her condition. Mama, Mia's not into eating curry chicken anymore, Leah said, smirking. She's into shrimp or sushi or whatever it is that rich boyfriend of hers takes her to. Mia ignored her little sister, who thrived on trying to get a reaction from her. Though Leah was a few inches taller than her, they resembled each other in the looks department. Their personalities, however, were as different as the sun and the moon. I'm just not that hungry right now, Mia said to her mother. She managed to swallow a few bites of her dinner to appease her. Hmm. So, how's Nate? You haven't mentioned him much lately. He's fine, she mumbled, concentrating on the food on her plate. Just the sound of his name brought on a wave of intense emotion. Her mother had never met Nate, but she had spoken to him on the phone a few times. The first time when she had been stuck in Chicago during the holidays. Nate had been charming and courteous. Her mother had taken to him instantly. Mia didn't want to think about the time when the snowstorm had prevented her from traveling to Detroit to spend Christmas with her mom and sister. Since she had been stranded in Chicago, Nate had spent the holiday with her as the storm raged outside. It had been easy to forget about the rest of the world as they stayed trapped in her small, warm apartment. That night she had given him her virginity, and it had felt right. Her sister, however, had gotten to meet Nate when she had come up for a few days in March for a modeling agency casting call. Her sister had been embarrassingly obnoxious toward him during their one dinner out together, but Nate had taken it all in stride, exuding the patience of someone dealing with a troublesome child. Mia ate enough to satisfy her mother, then got up to clear the table. Leah, help your sister. Her sister huffed loudly and ungracefully rose from the table. She was packing the leftovers into the fridge when her sister dumped the dirty dishes in the sink. I help cook, so you have to do the dishes. Whatever, Leah, Mia called over her shoulder. She had hoped at 20 her sister would have gotten a little less selfish and aggravating, but that didn't seem to be the case. Cool, her sister said triumphantly. Where's your cell? I'm out of minutes. Mia sighed. She didn't want her little sister going through her phone, but she had learned years ago when it came to Leah, it was best to pick her battles. It needs to charge, Mia had made the long drive only to have her phone die on her when she got into Detroit. Mm, hold on. Something got into my eye here. Okay. Okay, her sister said with a shrug. I'll charge it for you. Where is it? In my purse, Mia said absently. But it's dead, she yelled. Mia was busy scrubbing and rinsing. She didn't notice when her sister returned to the kitchen until she leaned against the counter next to her. Mia glanced over at her sister and asked, Did you find it? Yeah, she said, and I found this too. She gripped in her sister's palm were gripped in her sister's palm were Mia's prenatal vitamins and a pamphlet she had taken from Dr. Ellis' office. Mia dropped the ceramic plate into the sink and grabbed for the items her sister held, but Nia snatched them back. Give those to me. Excuse me. Her anger intensified at the mischievous smile on Leah's face. Her sister pulled out the mini booklet and read the front cover. Pregnancy. How to keep you and your baby healthy and happy. You can't be, are you? Oh, wow, this is just too good. Little Miss Goody Goody Tear is having a baby. Shut up, Mia rushed to her sister, wrestling the items from her tight grasp. Their mother burst into the kitchen. They immediately pulled away. What is going on in here? Mia turned off that faucet. Now, what the blank is wrong with you two? Nothing, Mama, Leah said, grinning. Mia was just about to tell you that that you're gonna be a grandma. Silence filled the kitchen as her mother and sister stared at her. Mia leaned against the sink, the air rushing out of her. She looked at her sister, too astonished to speak. Leah just shrugged. They had never been close. Their personalities had just been too different for them to ever be as close as she would have liked. But Mia never expected such vindictiveness from her sister. Instead of the disappointment she had expected to see on her mother's face, there was a sort of stunned disbelief. At her mother's dazed, unwavering stare, Mia glanced away, her shoulders slumped. At least now, her secret was out. Mia, is that true? She closed her eyes, wanting to be anywhere but there at that moment. Yes, she whispered. Her mother said nothing, but Leah wasn't quite finished with her persecution. Can you believe this, Mama? She said, breaking the thick silence. All this time. You can go now, Leah. But, Ma, I said go. Leah dropped the medicine bottle and pamphlet on the counter and stormed out of the kitchen. Once alone, her mother filled a pot with hot water and walked to the stove. I was going to tell you myself, she finally said. That's why I came home. I wanted to tell you in person. Her mother gave no indication that she heard her as she concentrated on peeling and crushing the large ginger root. Mama, say something. Her mother dropped the contents into the boiling pot before turning to face her. Mia, what I have to say doesn't matter. What I think doesn't matter either. What matters now is that baby you're carrying. You're disappointed, aren't you? I would be lying if I said I wasn't, but I was in your situation at your age. My only hope was that you and Leah wouldn't follow in my footsteps. Tears blurred Mia's vision. I didn't mean for this to happen. Her mother softened and pulled her into a gentle hug. I know, baby. But now your life isn't yours anymore. Everything you do from now on has to be for that baby. Nia knew that, but having her mother say it gave it a finality that terrified her. Her mother went to the cabinet and took down two mugs. When is the baby due? January, she whispered. She watched as her mother poured the pale yellow liquid into them. Nia took the small steaming cup her mother handed her and sat down at the small kitchen table. She cradled the warm mug, the heat soothing her cold, stiff fingers. So, what's your plan? What do you mean? I plan to raise it, of course. Her mother's dark eyes turned gentle. I can see that, but how? You just lost your job and you're so far away from us. Those facts already occupied Mia's waking thoughts. They were, mm-mm, they were a few of the many issues that kept her up at night. But her mother had raised her and Leah on her own, and Mia could do it too. Just because she didn't want to do it alone didn't mean she couldn't. You did it on your own, so can I. Her mother shook her head. I did it on my own because I had no choice. I don't want to see you struggle like I did. Not when you don't have to. What should I do? Does Nate know? No, she whispered. Why not? It's complicated. Only because you're making it so. I know you love him. Mia nodded. Her mother grabbed her hand and squeezed it. I could tell from the beginning just by the way you talked about him. And I was really hoping you wouldn't get hurt. But men will be men, and you can't love a man more than he loves you. He has to love you more, Mia, or else you end up with your heart broken. Tears began to flow down her cheeks. That's where Mia had made her mistake. She had loved him so much and had fooled herself into thinking he felt the same way. I don't know why you decided to keep this from him, but you didn't make this baby by yourself. The best thing for you to do is to tell him and see whether or not he mans up and takes responsibility. And what if he doesn't? Mia whispered. He already told me he doesn't want kids. Then he should have thought about that before he stuck his thing where it shouldn't have gone. Not going to say what she said. Nia's cheeks burned with embarrassment. Her mother's words painted a vivid image in her mind that made her want to find a box to hide in, then take that box and bury it in a deep, dark closet. I've told you before, her mother continued, you can't turn a cockroach into a prince. No matter how rich or poor, how educated or whatever, men cannot be trusted. It was true. Her mother had pounded that into her head. Not that her mother hated men, she just didn't trust them. Mia didn't remember much about her father. He had walked out on them a little after Leah was born, and the burden had then fallen on her mother to become their sole provider. There were times Yvette Trent worked two, sometimes three jobs to keep them comfortable. She couldn't remember if her mother ever even dated. She had simply worked and taken care of her two daughters with a strictness that she deemed necessary for their own well being. But Mia had listened with one ear open. She had held on tight to her belief that true love still existed and had truly believed she would find it someday. Now look at me. Maybe Nate was right. It was time to she go got her head out of the clouds. If it doesn't work out, her mother said after a while, then you should think about moving back here. Her mother's words gave her pause. She certainly didn't want to raise her child on her own, but she didn't want to become a burden on her mother either. Her mother must have sensed her hesitation because she added before Mia could say anything. I would sleep so much better knowing you weren't alone. With me and Leah here, you wouldn't be. It's either that or I'm moving to Chicago. Tears clouded her vision, and she didn't know why. She laughed at her erratic emotions. Maybe they were tears of joy, but either way, she was happy and relieved to have her mother's support. Okay, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I'll think about it. But Mia didn't have much to think about. When she got back to her apartment, a pile of bills ranging from utilities to medical crowded her center table. She had forestalled her job search, wanting to finish out the semester. But now that classes were over, her bills were piling up, and she didn't even know where to begin. Nate had made his point loud and clear. 2 weeks had passed, and still no word from him. It hurt her, but she refused to let his callous attitude discourage her. She was prepared to raise her child as best she could, with or without him. She would have to put school on pause, which she didn't want to do, but her baby came first. She fully intended to go back once her baby was born. She had weighed her options seriously, but it all led to one definitive decision. With Nate keeping his distance and no job for her to go to, there was nothing tying her here. She would return home to raise her baby. She could she would miss Chicago as it had been her home these past 6 years, but she wasn't prepared to do this on her own, and she had more than herself to think about now. She placed her hand over her belly and felt the firmness there. A fierce protectiveness overcame her. The reality that she was now responsible for another life changed everything. What she wanted didn't factor anymore. Yeah, I remember that feeling. I think every mom feels that way. Baby comes first, everything else is secondary. Mhm. He needed to see her. It had been about 2 weeks, and Nate didn't think he could hold out any longer. He didn't care that she hadn't called first, he just wanted to see her. Now that he was back from his fool's errand, the global summit his father had insisted he attend, Nate was eager to get to the office. When he arrived at MacArthur, Murphy and Company, however, he was disappointed to find an older woman sitting behind the executive assistant's desk. He strode into his father's office and asked without preamble, "Where's Mia?" Charles looked up from the document he was reading. "Welcome back. How was your trip?" Nate walked up to his desk but didn't respond. Charles had laid down the papers that leaned back in his chair. "Stop glowering at me and have a seat, Nathan." "Where's Mia?" he asked again. Charles raised a brow. "You seem awfully concerned about my former assistant." "Former?" Nate stared levelly at his father. So he knew. Now he understood why his father had sent him to a summit that had been more of a glorified networking event. Nate hadn't gleaned anything resourceful for MMC. "Did you fire her?" he asked. Charles tilted his head to the side and regarded him closely. "I don't know what you and Mia had going on here, and frankly, I don't care. But you could do a lot better than a barely competent executive assistant." Nate's jaw clenched. Charles MacArthur was an unbelievable snob. He looked down his nose at anyone who didn't fit in his social circle, but Nate had made certain no one at MMC knew about his relationship with Mia, particularly not his father. It had been more for her protection than his. If he hadn't expected his father to make things more difficult for her, he wouldn't have cared who knew about them. Charles, however, had done more than make things difficult for her. He had fired her for his own personal reasons. The company may have filed it as a lack of confidence or whatever, but Nate knew it had been largely out of spite on his father's part. Nate had missed the look at his father had given them when she had been in there, and he hadn't been able to tear his eyes away from her. She had been only a heartbeat away from him. Nothing had ever been more difficult than for him to hide his reaction behind his usually cool indifference and not reach for her. Anyway, I suggest you get her out of your system. She's gone now, and I don't need you distracted. Nate's eyes flared. His father was the last person who should suggest anything to him about his relationship. His marriage alone was a living disaster. It's none of your business who I'm seeing, Nate said coldly. And if you fired her because of this, Charles raised a brow. You'll do what, Nathan? He fixed his father with a hard glare. I'll make blank sure she sues the blank out of this place. Charles let out a harsh laugh. Well, you can rest assured that I have enough to prove her incompetent. And besides, it wouldn't be in your best interest to have a lawsuit on your hands. What the blank are you talking about? You will refrain from talking to me with such disrespect, Nathan. Like it or not, I am your father. He gritted his teeth. Not much of one, he thought, but arguing with him would be a waste of time. So Nate left with the words unsaid. His father had spent part of his life ignoring him until he eventually found use for him. It was after he finished business school that his father started paying attention to him and putting him into MMC business affairs. Nate, however, liked to keep his involvement minimum. He wanted little to do with his father's company, and there was an inherent determination in him to prove he could set out on his own. His father rose from his seat and stood staring out the large windows. It's time you take your place on the board, Nathan. I've allowed you to ignore your responsibilities long enough. I don't think so, Father. We've already had this discussion. I'll step in as needed, but I'm not going to be sucked behind a desk working for you or anyone else. Charles turned to face him, and the irritation was plain on his face. It was a look Nathan was all too familiar with, but he refused to back down. Taking over his father's company was not part of his career plans. You're a MacArthur. You wouldn't have to work for anyone, but you would work with me so I can groom you in running a real company. Nick clenched his teeth. Whether my business measures up to your standards or not doesn't change the fact that I have my own responsibilities there. I don't have the time or the interest to be here full time. His father observed him, eyes curious. Why not? I've seen you at work, and there's a shrewdness and competitiveness in you that reminds me so much of my own when I was your age. You're a natural leader, Nathan. Your little investment company, though impressive, is just a hobby. You're meant to run a company like MMC. Nate was stunned, though he wasn't sure if it was more than what his father had said or because he had said it so matter-of-factly. Though it had been a throwaway line, Charles had never given him praise, indirect or otherwise, and Nate didn't know how to respond. His irritating tendency to impress his father, however, was already swaying him to do what he had set out never to do. If I agree to this, Nate said carefully, you'll have to give Mia her job back. When his father didn't respond to the stipulation, he added, if you want me, you will have to accept her. That's the only way you'll get me here. A cross between admiration and annoyance flashed in his father's eyes, but Nate didn't particularly care. He was going to be with Mia, this time openly, and his father would have to just accept that. But first, he wanted to make sure he righted his father's wrong. Though Mia had never told him, he knew she didn't particularly enjoy working for his father. But because she was putting herself through law school, she needed the job. Negotiating with your own father, he finally said. I knew you were a natural. Nate said nothing as he regarded his father. Charles sighed and walked back to his desk. Fine, but find someplace simple to put her. Maybe the front desk can use another receptionist. He gritted his teeth. Mia was smart and driven, and it was obvious his father hadn't taken advantage of that. She was too good for you, he blurted out. As soon as those words left his mouth, the same thought echoed back at him. She was too good for him, too. He shook away the thought and without another word slammed out of his father's office, not wanting to acknowledge there may be some truth in that thought. He drove until he eventually found himself standing outside her apartment door. The desire to see her was magnetic. He hesitated for the briefest of seconds before he gave the door two hard knocks. A moment passed before she called out through the door, "Coming!" Another second, and the door swung open. Too much time had passed between them, and he wasn't prepared for the relief and pleasure that filled him just by being near her again. But the smile she had on her beautiful lips fell. Large, slanted, dark eyes stared up at him, and he couldn't look away. With her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and her smooth brown skin clear of makeup, she was still breathtaking. Only she could make cut-off shorts, fuzzy slippers, and an oversized sweatshirt look sexy. Hi, hi, she whispered back. He wanted to touch her, but wasn't sure how welcoming she would be. What are you doing here? She asked after a short time. He hadn't planned, excuse me, he hadn't planned on what to say when he saw her, but he had hoped by him making the first move, she would see how much he wanted to be with her. Instead, she kept herself guarded, so unlike the carefree open book she had been. Huh. You have your job back at MMC, he said without thinking. She looked at him puzzled, then shook her head, frowning. No thanks. I would rather eat snakes than work for your father again. You wouldn't work for him. I'll find someplace better fitting for you to be in. No thanks, she said. He looked at her curiously. So you've already found something else? Nate, why are you really here? He ran his hand through his hair, letting the subject drop. If she didn't want the job, he wouldn't force it on her. May I come in? He asked softly. She hesitated, her eyes somber, as if he had posed her with a grim question. But then she stepped back so he could enter. She glanced out to the hall before shutting the door. Were you expecting someone? Someone else? He couldn't help the hard edge of his voice. She nodded, walking around him. My neighbor from 6C is supposed to bring me down some tape. He suddenly noticed the boxes and newspapers scattered around the apartment. What's up with these? I'm moving, she whispered. He surveyed the apartment. The place was small, but he had always found it cozy. Now, with all her things scattered around, the apartment appeared smaller and crowded. Maybe a bigger place wouldn't be so bad. Where to? He asked, trying for a light conversation. Do you really care? Okay, I deserve that, he said. I was at SASS that night, and I'm sorry. She was silent for a moment, then nodded. I'm sorry you were an ASS too. Her small, soft smile, however, took away some of the sting from her words. I missed you, he blurted. Her eyes softened. I missed you too, she whispered. Her words gave him hope as a renewed sense of joy surged through him. You know, I've been thinking about you, he began, about us, about hitting the reset button and having us start over. Her eyes glistened. Do you really mean that? He couldn't stand it anymore. He walked up to her and trailed a finger along her jaw. Her skin was warm and smooth beneath the pad of his thumb. Yeah, he murmured. Being without you has been HELL. He leaned down and captured her lips for a light, tender kiss. He meant for it to be brief, but the taste of her was intoxicating. She was like sweet nectar, and he couldn't get enough. He was hard and hungry for her. He moved his hands down her waist and pulled her solidly to him, deepening the kiss. He tightened his hold as her slight tremors fueled his desire. She brought her hands up to his chest, but to his great frustration, she pushed away from him and took a step back. Nate, wait, she murmured thickly. I have something to tell you first. He frowned, trying to clear the fog of desire that choked his mind. Her tone said it was serious, and his back went rigid. It was the same tone she had the night she suggested they take a break. What is it? Before she could continue, a knock came at the door. She rushed past him to answer it. From where he stood, he could see a tall black man at the door. Thanks, James. I'll bring back what's left when I'm through. Keep it, the guy said with a crooked smile. You won't let me take you to dinner, so this is the least I can do. Nate walked up to the door wanting to get a better look at this James who was boldly flirting with his girl. He also wanted James to get a good look at him in case he got any more ideas for dinners. Nate stood directly behind Mia, and the man glanced up at him over her shoulder. He lost his lopsided grin. I'm sorry, I didn't know you had company. Mia turned to follow the man's gaze and bumped into him. She let out a sudden startled, oh, then made a quick introduction. Hey, James said in acknowledgement. Nate greeted him in kind. After a brief, awkward silence, James turned back to Mia. Well, I better run, but keep the tape, he said with a wink. Hopefully, I won't need to move again for a while. Just let me know if you need anything else, he added. Nate's jaw clenched. This guy was annoying the heck out of him. Thanks, Mia said. I think I'm all set. She shut the door and turned back to him. Did you have to make that awkward? Is he the reason you haven't called me? She rolled her eyes and started back into the living room. She placed the bag James had handed her on the table, then turned to study him, her expression stoic. You made your choice, Nate. You left and stayed away. So you can't come here with your jealous boyfriend routine. You don't have that right. Nate looked at her steadily. Don't I? You wanted a break, so I gave you your space. I did call you last weekend, though, before I left for Belgium. But when you didn't answer, when she hadn't answered, he figured he must have misread her response to him in his father's office. She paused for a moment, a slight frown furrowing her brow. I went to visit my mother last weekend and my phone died during the drive. You must have called then. Nate's shoulders relaxed slightly. She hadn't been avoiding him. Anyway, James actually works at MMC, and dinner was going to be his way of thanking me for helping him find his apartment. But as I told him, Tate will do. He's not your competition, she added quietly. Nate walked up behind her and pulled her into his arms. Her light, sweet scent tickled his nose. I'm sorry, I wasn't nice to your friend, he whispered in her ear. She hesitated for just a heartbeat, then leaned back against him, her hands resting over his crossed arms. He placed a quick kiss on the side of her neck. It felt good to just hold her in his arms again. But hold her wasn't all he wanted to do. He placed his hands under her sweatshirt and began to inch it up. Nate, she started, grabbing his hand. Before we hit the reset button, I have something I need to tell you. He groaned and pulled away from her. Why do I have a feeling it's nothing good? She turned to face him, a small smile on her lips. Actually, I think it's wonderful. But the look on her face, the nervousness tugging at her sleeve, told him otherwise. Okay, let's hear it. She hesitated, looking up at him with an odd expression on her face. Then she let out a deep sigh, and her words spilled out in a long-winded rush. Nate, you know I love you, and even though you've never repeated the words back, I wouldn't take them back. I'm actually glad you haven't, because I wouldn't want you to parrot words back to me if you're not ready to say them. But even though I love you and always will, I need to know if you want me enough, if you care for me enough to want a family. The muscles in his chest tightened. His agitation and annoyance overwhelmed him. Not this again. Why? Why do you have to back me into a corner, huh? I care about you. I want you. Why can't that be enough for now? She shook her head, her eyes bright but guarded. Because it can't be, she whispered. A long and painful silence stretched between them. He didn't know about love. Heck, he wasn't sure he could love anyone. He never said those words to anyone, not even his parents. But he did know that he wanted her more than he had ever wanted anything. Yet, what he wanted and what she expected were too far apart for them to find a common ground. And he wasn't going to make promises he wasn't prepared to keep. So that's it, he snapped. I either marry you, have some kids, or we're over. She stood there, her arms wrapped tightly around her center, saying nothing. Nate cursed. If I walk out of here, I won't come back. Yet the thought of being without her, never seeing her again, was almost unbearable. I won't expect you to, she whispered. His frustration and resentment boiled over. Without thinking, he grabbed her and kissed her hard. The contact was short and thoroughly unsatisfying. He immediately released her, not sure why he had done it, and disgusted with himself for letting his anger push him to do it. She took a step back, brushing her fingers lightly over her lips, stunned, a stunned expression in her wide, hurt eyes. He felt like blank, but all his regret and frustration didn't change anything. It was time he stopped chasing after her like some lost puppy. The tightening in his chest was still there, and he let out a heavy breath. I hope you find your fairy tale ending, he said bitterly. She briefly closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were filled with such intense sadness he almost couldn't stand it. And I hope you find someone to love, she whispered. He tensed, but her eyes held no maliciousness or spite, just a pain and hurt that he was sure mirrored his own. Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Ooh, ooh. So it is now 5 years later. Mm. I mean, she's had the baby. Oh my goodness. Hold on here a second. I dropped something. I'm trying to reach down and get it without spilling off myself out of my chair. Funny how when you get older, you can't do the things you used to do when you were young. Mikey, baby, it's time to eat. It's 5 years later, okay? So Mikey must be the baby that she had. Mia placed a small bowl of macaroni and cheese on the table as her son came running into the kitchen. He rushed to the table and with bright chocolate brown eyes peered into his favorite orange bowl. Mommy, I said I wanted Cheetos. Not tonight. Mickey pouted his small round face. Why not? Because I said. Now, apple or grape? Grape, he exclaimed, climbing up into his chair. Mia brought the carton of grape juice to the table and filled his green plastic straw cup. She also filled the two small cups on the table. Where's your auntie? Mia asked. Mikey shrugged his small shoulders as he stuffed a spoonful of macaroni into his mouth. Some made it back into the bowl, some on his shirt. Leah, she called out, dinner. Mia sat down at the table just as her sister came into the kitchen, still wearing her security uniform. Leah took one look at the table and sighed heavily. Really, Mia? Macaroni and meatloaf again? I'm trying to get rid of the leftovers, but if you want something else, feel free to make it. Her sister responded by falling into her seat and grabbing her fork without another word. Mia looked over at Mikey's bowl. Mouse, you're still not eating meat? Mikey scratched his mouth, his smooth, light brown face, and shook his head viciously. Last week, he had decided he was no longer eating meat, so Mia made sure there was no meat in his bowl. She was used to her son's quirky eating habits and didn't make a big fuss when Mikey would pick a food group he no longer found appetizing. 2 months ago, it had been macaroni. Leah pointed to his bowl with her fork. You know, if you keep eating all that cheese, you're going to really turn into a mouse. Nuh-uh, Mikey said. Mommy said that's not true. Mikey, the one word followed by a stern look was enough to turn her 4-year-old sheepish, sheepish son. He knew better than to talk with his mouth full. Sorry, Mommy, he said after he had his food swallowed. When dinner was over, Mia got up and began clearing the table. Mikey, go get ready for bath time. Mikey scrambled out of his seat and ran out the kitchen. When Leah started in the same direction, Mia stopped her. Aren't you going to help me? She asked, staring pointedly at the dishes. I'm going to work, Leah said as if that should have been obvious. And Mia looked at the clock on the wall. It was a little after 7. I thought you just got in. Someone just called out sick, and they asked me to cover. Someone has to make money around here, her sister said pointedly. I'll be back in the morning. Mia placed the dishes in the sink, trying to suppress her guilt. Leah had been a big help these past few months, while Mia was in between work, so she could understand her sister's resentment. Hold on. Hmm. Yeah, okay. I'll be back by 7. It didn't escape Mia's notice that her sister hadn't asked about the meeting with the life insurance company. Leah steered clear of everything relating to their mother's passing. Mia tried to understand how her sister felt. Their mother's passing had affected them greatly, but Mia wished she had just a little support from her sister while she sorted this out. Fighting the insurance company for what was rightfully owed them was taking its toll on her. Mia hadn't gotten a chance to fully grieve since their mother's passing 9 months ago. Yvette Trent had been diagnosed with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, another form of lung cancer the doctors believed had resulted from her sarcoidosis. The amount of scar tissue that had developed in her lungs because of the inflammatory disease had eventually forced her mother onto an oxygen machine, which ultimately hadn't been enough. Weeks before her 55th birthday, she had stopped breathing. Mia didn't realize the tears were falling until they landed on her forearm. She sat down at the table and tried to compose herself. She knew if she let the thoughts in, she would have another breakdown and scare Mikey again. But it was hard not thinking about her mother. She had been her rock since she had returned home 5 years ago. Her mother had never questioned her decision or asked about Nate. She had seen how much Mia had been hurting when she had returned from Chicago and had waited until Mia was ready to tell her. Then again, there hadn't been much to tell. After she hit Mikey, her mother had been her greatest supporter and teacher. With her gone now, Mia was lost. She wiped away her tears and took a deep, steadying breath. She thought of the good times, forever grateful that her mother had gotten to know her grandson. She had spent what time she had with Mikey despite her suffering. And though Mia missed her fiercely, knowing her mother was finally at peace gave Mia some solace, if only a little. However, the demands of life were disrupting what small comfort she was gaining from that. Though she and Leah tried, they were fast falling behind on their bills. Soon they wouldn't be able to manage the mortgage without the payout from her mother's life insurance. The policy wasn't for a large amount by any means, but it would certainly be enough to help them pay down their increasing debt. The life insurance had been their mother's idea after Mikey was born. She had wanted to make sure her daughters and grandson had some financial security in the event something happened to her. In thinking of her son, Mia had also purchased a policy, but now the insurance company was denying their claim. After weeks of back and forth, she would finally have a meeting with the claims manager. This was her last hope. Other than taking them to court and spending money they didn't have, all she could do now was pray and be prepared. She didn't want to think about what would happen if the insurance company refused their claim again. Miss Trent, I'm sorry for your loss, but unfortunately, the claim isn't valid under your current policy. Mr. Freeman, I've brought in everything you've asked. All the medical reports, the bank statements, the original policy forms proving that my mother's policy was still active after all are all here. What more do you want? I understand and I appreciate that. However, the policy is not the issue here. Your mother's medical records indicate a pre-existing condition, and because it wasn't reported during the time of contract, it unfortunately voids the policy. My mother passed away from idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. She was treated for pulmonary sarcoidosis years ago. Those are two separate diseases and should be considered as such because the medical records state that the sarcoidosis resulted in the fibrosis. It is being classified as a precondition. I'm sorry, but there is nothing more I can do. Mia didn't want his sympathy. She needed to know how she was going to pay their mounting bills and keep a roof over their heads. She leaned forward in her seat. Mr. Freeman, you don't understand. We are going to lose our house. This is why my mother purchased a policy to begin with. There has to be something you can do. Based on her plan, you are eligible for a full return of the premium. For how much? For how much? Mr. Freeman told her the amount, and Mia's small bubble of hope deflated. It would barely be enough to cover a month of their mortgage, and they were already 2 months behind. She shook her head, feeling a small headache forming. Of course, there's some paperwork that needs to be completed. Once that's been processed and approved, a check will be mailed to you within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Her shoulders slumped. She couldn't hold off the banking creditors for that long. Then again, she had no choice. She stood up, thanked Mr. Freeman, and started toward the door of his small, sparse office. Again, I'm sorry, Miss Trent, he called out. I truly understand how difficult it is to lose a parent. She stopped, staring at the older man whose intelligent eyes were filled with a familiar sadness. She nodded in acknowledgement, then, without another word, walked out of his office. She needed to clear her mind. Since they wouldn't be able to rely on the insurance money, she needed to start thinking ahead, and whether Leah wanted to or not, they were going to have to figure this out together. She pulled up to the pale yellow single-story house that had been her home for the past 16 years. It had also been her son's home since the day she had brought him home from the hospital 5 years ago. She could remember how excited they had all been to move into their first home. Their mother had worked hard to purchase this place, and Mia couldn't imagine losing it because she couldn't afford the mortgage. She exited the suffocating car, vaguely noting the dry, withering grass. Though it had been the least of her worries, the lawn would soon need some attention. As she headed to the front door, she spotted her neighbor, Mr. Wallace, sitting outside on his front porch, his dark, weathered face breaking out into a big smile. Mia smiled in return, waving a silent greeting. She loved her neighborhood, as her mother had, and had no desire to leave. She found Mikey sleeping soundly on the couch in front of the television. She loved watching her son sleep. His small, relaxed form always managed to put her at ease. She gently ran her fingers through his hair, then carried him to his bed. He had been napping less often lately, leaving her exhausted at the end of each day. But today was an exception. Her little man must have tuckered himself out. Despite his dark curls, round cheeks, and creamy complexion, she could see traces of his father in him. Mikey had her eyes, but everything else bore a strong resemblance to his father. She swiftly shook the thought away. Right now wasn't the time to think about him. It would be 5 years this month since she had last seen Nate MacArthur. It was hard enough not thinking about him when he invaded her thoughts at night, and as Mikey grew older, the task of forgetting him grew harder. She left her son's room and found her sister in the kitchen reading a letter. She looked up when she saw Mia approaching. You have to read this, she said, holding a letter out to her. It just got here about an hour ago through a certified mail. She took the letter. What she read knocked the wind out of her. She fell into the nearest seat and stared at her sister blankly. They can't be serious. We're only behind by 2 months. It's June, Mia. I think that puts us into 3 months. Notice of foreclosure stood out in bold, heavy font across the page. She immediately started thinking of the accounts they could borrow from. Yet, even as she thought of their meager savings, she knew it would barely carry them through the end of the summer. Then what? If they used it all up to pay the bank, that left them with nothing but basic living expenses. She hadn't been able to find work in 3 weeks. With the fragile state of the economy, it was getting increasingly difficult to find substantial, consistent work, much less work that was favorable to single mothers. Mia found herself bouncing from job to job, limited to jobs that did not require nights or weekends, since she couldn't afford a babysitter. This schedule worked perfectly as it allowed her to be with Mikey during those times, and Leah would have him during the day. Unfortunately, she had lost her last temp job and now spent her days and nights with her son, while her sister worked part-time as a makeup sales girl at the mall and part-time as a desk security guard. Mm. So, what are you going to do? Mia looked at her sister a little annoyed. Don't you mean what are we going to do? Look, Mia, I don't know how to tell you this, but I'm moving out. Mia didn't know what to say. She certainly hadn't expected this. Leah had never moved out on her own, even after she had graduated high school, and Mia had been open to her living in Chicago with her. Leah had decided to stay home. Her sister had even stayed around when Mia moved back home, and their small room had become crowded with a new baby added. When Mia didn't say anything, Leah finally glanced up at her. I know this is bad timing, but I'm ready to leave Detroit and move on. Where do you plan on going? She appreciated the sacrifices her sister had made to her. Leah loved her nephew, and despite their own personal relationship, Mia had come to rely on her support. She glanced at her. LA, of course. When Jackson gets out, we're leaving. Really, Leah? Jackson talks about moving to Los Angeles to start her modeling career were nothing new, but taking her old high school sweetheart with her definitely was. The influence Jackson had on her sister leaned toward the negative, and the only reason Leah hadn't completely spiraled down with her bad news boyfriend and seen the inside of a jail herself was because their mother had kept Leah on a tight leash. Now that their mother was gone, Mia could only hope her sister knew enough to keep herself out of trouble. Do you really think you're being realistic? You're 24 and broke. How do you plan to move and support yourself way across the country? Just because I don't want to be some fancy lawyer doesn't mean I'm stupid, she snapped. You're just jealous I'm actually going after my dream when you never even finished law school. Maria's back drew up. That stung, but maybe she had it coming. Leah had always accused her of putting down her dreams, and it was obvious she was doing it now. She just didn't want her sister to get hurt. She had learned the hard way how painful it was to life under an illusion. Fine, Mia said quietly. Do what you want. I will. I'm moving out at the end of next month, and I'm going to use my share of the insurance money to get started. So, is that the pot of gold you're hanging your dreams on? You better start looking elsewhere. Oh, what do you mean? Mia gave her sister a brief detailing of her meeting with Mr. Freeman and the insurance company decision. The news, however, didn't seem to faze her sister. Leah lifted her head with resolve. I'm still leaving. I have some of my own money saved up, and I'm ready to live my life. Mm. Mia didn't like the resentful tone in her sister's voice. It was accusatory and bitter. Last I checked, Mia snapped, no one forced you to stay here. Her sister leaned toward her. I stayed because Mama asked me to stay. You strolled in here pregnant and pathetic. You think she wanted to be saddled with you and a baby at her age, in her condition? I knew I couldn't leave, especially not after she got sick again. But it's time for me to do me. Her sister's words rolled through her, and Nia couldn't speak through her pain. Was I really a burden to you, Mama? The thought made her throat clog as tears burned her eyes. She swallowed the sudden lump in her throat. Then I would hate to stand in your way, she whispered stiffly. Please, don't let me or my baby stop you. Whatever, Mia, Leah snapped. Don't try to guilt trip me. You know I love Mouse and would do anything for him, but he's your son. You need to start thinking about what's best for him. Leah's last comment riled her like nothing else could. How dare she? Everything she did was for Mikey. My son always comes first. Everything I do for Mikey. Right. So is that why he doesn't know about his father? I bet the next thing you'll be telling him is that you're his mother and his father, right? That may have worked when Mama said it since our deadbeat dad chose not to stick around. But no one knows why Mikey's dad isn't around because it's no one's business, and it certainly isn't yours. Mia had been lucky that she hadn't had to explain to Mikey why he didn't have a father. Her son had asked once, and she had easily sidestepped it by reminding him he had a different kind of family that included only mommy, auntie, and grandma. But when he got older and eventually entered school, she knew the question would come again. Leah rose from the table and dropped the sack of bills down. You're right, she said. It isn't any of my business, but it's Mikey's. And good or bad, he should know about Nate, especially when the man can afford to take care of both of you. Though Mia hated to admit it, her sister's comments forced her to acknowledge her decision to keep Mikey from Nate. She had always stood by her actions, believing she was giving Nate the space and freedom he obviously wanted while protecting her son. She remembered the way he had declared with cold finality that he did not want children, and she would die before she let anyone make her son feel rejected or unwanted. Yet a strange guilt began to plague her as she realized she was purposely keeping father and son from knowing one another. She entertained the idea of going to Chicago, then immediately dropped it. Just the thought of going back to confront Nate about this was daunting and caused her stomach to clench. But another persistent part of her couldn't let that thought go. She spent the next several days making phone calls, trying to postpone the bank from putting up the foreclosure notice. With the help of legal aid and her own minimal knowledge from law school, she was able to negotiate a 90-day postponement on the foreclosure. But she had until the end of September to pay the bank, but still didn't know how she would manage to get all the money. Unless she went to the one man she had vowed never to go back to. She immediately repelled the thought, then shoved her pride aside as she rationalized her approach. Whether Nate wanted children or not was irrelevant now. He had one, and the least he could do was ensure they didn't go homeless. What she had to do was cast her feelings aside and ask for his help. The next day, she began making arrangements for their trip to Chicago. She was moving without feeling, mentally preparing for the most important, the most unnerving reunion in her life. A million scenarios crossed her mind as she thought about her initial meeting. None of them was comforting. She wouldn't back out of this, though. Auntie, her son shrieked, signaled her sister's arrival. Look, Mia, I called us a mouse. Mia smiled over her son's giggles. She reached for him and held him up. What should we do with him? Leah's eyes sparkled. I think we should eat him. Mikey's dark eyes widened in horror as Mia brought her face down to his tummy. Mommy, no, he shrieked, but Mia continued her soft nibbling as his little body squirmed, wiggled, and shook with laughter. She smiled over her son's wild, carefree laugh. Mikey was the most best thing that could have happened to her. The one thing she and Nate had gotten right, and she would do anything for him. She hoped she was doing the right thing by taking him to Chicago. Later that night, after she had put Mikey to bed, Mia went into the living room where her sister sat painting her nails. I'm going to Chicago tomorrow, she blurted. Her sister looked up with a faint smirk on her lips. Going to find and tell your ex he's a daddy? That and ask him to help me save the house. Why? You should just let the bank take it. And go where? This is our home. Not anymore. Not without Mama. Why don't you just get him for child support, her sister suggested. That way, the money you'll get over the years will be more than what this house is even worth. No, I don't want this to turn ugly or drag Mikey through the middle of some legal battle. Having a home for him is more important to me right now. And what if he refuses to help you with the house? You'll have to go after him for something. Mouse is his son too, and he should help. I guess I'll cross that bridge when I get there. Well, good luck with that. Will you be okay here by yourself? Yes, ma'am, she says. I'm not 12. Yeah, but sometimes her sister could conjure up trouble without even trying. Like when she had decided to borrow their mother's car without permission one night, supposedly to pick up a friend from the airport. Leah had ended up stranded far from the airport with the car stolen. Anyway, Jackson will be out soon, so I'll probably end up spending my time with him. Mia moaned. There Leah went, conjuring up trouble. Jackson had always been bad news, but whatever she had to say about him, her sister wouldn't listen, so she didn't bother. I booked a motel for us to stay in. I don't know how long we'll be gone, maybe a few days, but I'll leave you the address before I go. That done, she went to her bedroom and began making a list of things they would need for their trip. She didn't want to forget anything. The drive would be long for her son, and she wanted it to be as comfortable for him as possible. It didn't take her long, however, to realize she was just putting off the inevitable. Pushing the notepad aside, she went searching for the navy blue address book she kept. She stared at Nate's number for a long while. What if the number didn't work? What if he wasn't even in Chicago anymore? Before she could talk herself out of it, she grabbed her phone and dialed his number. Her heart pounded and her palms grew sweaty as the other line began to ring. Excuse me. Before her tight grip couldn't steady her hold on the phone, and as the seconds ticked by, another depressing thought struck her. What if he was with someone right now? Nate was an attractive guy, and it was late enough he could easily be entertaining company at this hour. Before she lost courage and slammed the phone down, a low, deep voice answered, Hello? Her voice lodged in her throat as the warm, masculine voice sent a wave of intense emotion that rocked her to her core. Oh God, I miss him. Silence crackled over the line between them while she tried desperately to rein in her wild emotions. Mia? She nearly dropped the phone at the sound of her name softly spoken. His voice had been like a gentle caress. She tightened her grip. Hi, Nate, she whispered. Silence filled the line for a heartbeat before he replied, Hi, Mia. More awkward silence filled the line before she asked, How'd you know it was me? He laughed softly. I don't get many calls from Michigan, especially at this hour. She unconsciously glanced at the bedside clock. It was a little after 10, 9 o'clock his time. I'm sorry for calling this late. I hope I'm not. I wasn't complaining, he interrupted. It's actually nice to hear your voice again, baby. Her heart lurched and she closed her eyes as the warmth of his words coursed through her. Excitement and longing sprang up in her, followed by guilt. She knew it was dangerous territory, but she'd like to think maybe he missed her as much as she missed him. Is everything okay? She smiled softly. Yeah, everything's fine. I just, I'm coming to Chicago this weekend, and I was hoping we could meet up. Silence. Her courage and anxiety began to war with each other when he didn't immediately respond. I know this is sudden, and I understand if you don't have time to see me. I just wanted, I have time, he cut in softly. When will you get here? Tomorrow night. She gave him the name of the motel she would be checking into. Relieved he didn't say anything about it. It was a low budget motel in a questionable neighborhood, but it was the only thing she could afford on such short notice. I can't wait to see you, he said, before they ended the call, and something in her stomach fluttered. Would, would he feel the same way after she introduced him to his son? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Nate forced himself to concentrate on the spreadsheet in front of him. His eyes were on the computer screen, but his mind was miles away. Since Mia's call last night, he hadn't been able to concentrate on anything else. She was the last person he'd expected to hear from. Even after 5 years, she managed to bring up feelings in him he had thought long forgotten and buried. He didn't know why she had finally sought him out and didn't care. The chance to be with her again, even for one night, had filled his mind with all kinds of fantasies. During their brief conversation, she hadn't sounded bitter or angry. If anything, she sounded as if she missed him. It hadn't taken some time. It had taken some time, but he had eventually come to accept that she was no longer a part of his life. It hadn't been easy, but the ache of losing her had eventually become bearable. He had spent a lot of time thinking of that night, wondering what he could have done differently, but concluded his honesty had been best for them both. He wasn't going to string her along for his own selfish needs. The only problem with honesty, however, was that someone always ended up miserable. The year it took for him to stop obsessing over her had proven as much. He had tried his blankest to stay away from her, but had experienced a moment of weakness. An overwhelming urge to call her one January had come over him, but when he tried, her number had been disconnected. He hadn't tried again since. Now she was back and wanted to see him. Anticipation buried in his gut. He wanted to see her too. A lot of time had passed, and he had spent much of it thinking about what was important to him. He glanced at the time at the lower corner of his computer screen. Time was really dragging his heels today. He couldn't wait to leave the office, but before he could, he had a thorn in his side he needed to remove. Stephen Rhodes, one of their longtime consultants, had gotten the company into a serious mess, and Nate was scrambling to fix it or risk losing a vital client. MacArthur Murphy and Company was one of the leading management consulting firms in the nation, which had grown ever since he had taken charge. But Rhodes was fast becoming a liability. He had been with MMC for quite some time, slowly working his way up the ladder. Yet since his recent promotion, his incompetence had become glaring. Nate was annoyed it had taken them this long to realize Stephen Rhodes wasn't cut out for the job. With this knowledge obvious to them now, Nick wouldn't risk the company's reputation or losing one of their top clients. In order to win back their clients' trust, Nate had to get rid of the problem. That afternoon, he did exactly that. MacArthur, you can't do this, Stephen said, leaning forward in his seat. I just closed on my new house, and I just bought my wife a new car. Nate stared at the older man. His obviously expensive suit said he had been enjoying the financial perks his recent promotion allotted. Stephen, your mistake is about to cost us the Black Bakersfield's account. You, of all people, should know how important that account is to the company. That's not something we're prepared to take lightly. Stephen ran his hand through his thinning hair in agitation. It's not my fault. I've been giving Tracy more responsibility and stop, Nate interrupted, disgusted with the man. He had done his checking before he called Stephen into his office, and based on his discovery, the fault had been completely his. Yet instead of owning his mistake, the blank was trying to pass off the blame. I'm giving you a chance to put in your resignation and walk away from this with some dignity. Stephen glared at him, his thick brows furrowing deeply. Do you have a family, MacArthur? Do you understand what you're doing is not only going to affect me, but my girls too? Nate fixed him with a level stare as Stephen threw him a disgusted glare. Of course you don't, he continued. I can see in your eyes you don't give a blank that I have a wife and 3 girls who depend on me. Nate continued staring at him, his temper and impatience mounting, but he didn't let it show. This is your doing, Stephen, not mine. If you refuse to put in your resignation, so be it. Either way, you're no longer employed at MacArthur Murphy and Company. A short while later, an angry and disgruntled Stephen was escorted out of the building. Nate hated this part of the job, but it couldn't be avoided. He spent the last 5 years working at the helm of the company, first as director and now as CEO. His father had eventually retired, and it was now Nate's responsibility to see to the growth and prosperity of the company. He had implemented a few changes, which had resulted in a few department shakeups, layoffs, new hires, and a growing client list. MMC was proven to be formidable in the industry, and Nate couldn't afford any weak links in his chain. Now that Stephen Rhodes was gone, he could concentrate on repairing his business relationship with their unhappy client. But not tonight. Tonight, he will be concentrating on repairing another kind of relationship. Nate picked up his cell phone. He wondered if she had already made it into the city. It was now after 5 on a Friday, and the office was deserted with everyone taking advantage of the new summer hours. He wasn't working on anything pressing and didn't look forward to going to his own quiet condo. He found Mia's number and hit the send button, listening intently to the ringing. Maybe if she was already here, he could take her out to dinner. The polite thing for him to do would be to let her get settled in, maybe suggest they meet for lunch tomorrow. Nate rejected the thought. He didn't know what had brought her back to Chicago, but he had waited 5 years and wouldn't wait another night. Yes, hello? Nate startled at the young, high-pitched voice that came through the line. For a second, he thought he had dialed the wrong number. Hello, Nate replied hesitantly. Who is this? Mommy said I shouldn't talk to strangers, the little boy said casually, seemingly unconcerned by the fact that he was indeed talking to a stranger. For a moment, Nate was baffled. Mia had a kid? He couldn't help the stab of jealousy that pierced him at the thought of her bearing another man's child. Oh, what's your mom's name? Mommy? Nate stifled a groan, then laughed. Okay, what's your name? Mikey? Nice to meet you, Mikey, Nate said lightly. Is there a grown-up I can talk to? At the brief silence, Nate imagined a little boy was shaking his head. I'm not supposed to talk to strangers. Nate's lip quirked. Yes, buddy, you're right. You shouldn't talk to strangers. Now, can you pass the phone to your mom? Nope. He jerked his head back, surprised by the casually spoken refusal. Why not? Because mommy's having her bath and I'm not supposed to play on the phone. For some reason, Nate felt the need to ease his little worries. You're not playing, we're just chatting. I'm not supposed to do that either. Why not? I don't know. Mommy said I'm supposed to sit still and watch TV, but I hate it here. It smells like dirt. Nate didn't know how to respond to that or what to make of his unusual conversation. He wasn't used to dealing with kids or talking to them. He couldn't even remember the last time he had been around one. Please don't tell Mommy, Mikey whispered. All right, Nate assured him. But When your mom gets finished with her bath, tell her I called, okay? Can you remember that? Yes, I'm good at remembering. Excellent. I'll talk to you later, Mikey. Okay, bye. When Nate hung up the phone, he realized he hadn't given the boy his name. It didn't matter. Mia would probably see his number and know it was him calling. But the fantasy of having a private dinner together came to a bitter halt, along with his hopes of anything else happening tonight. Not that he had set any expectations, but he couldn't help thinking of a few ways they could have ended the night. One being with her at his place. Yet that fantasy certainly wasn't going to happen now. Not with a kid around. Do you care about me enough to want a family? Those words echoed in Nate's head, coming flittering from a past he had worked hard to forget. Memories of what he could remember from that night flashed in fragments in his mind. Though it had nearly killed him to walk out on her that night, he had refused to be forced into something he hadn't been ready for. Ultimately, that had been the end of something he had never found again. What if I got pregnant? A sudden cold chill ran down his spine as another memory echoed in his head. He remembered her solemn yet determined eyes, the way she had wrapped her arms around her middle as if she was protecting. Nate bolted to his feet with a vicious curse, sending his executive chair crashing to the floor. It couldn't be. Mia wouldn't do that to him. She wouldn't keep something like this from him. She wouldn't. Yet the pieces started to fit, and things started to become clear. She had tried to wrench a long-term commitment from him, and when he refused, she had ended them. Suddenly, Nate knew, with every fiber in his being, the little boy he had just spoken to moments ago was his son. A flood of emotions began hurtling through him. Disbelief and rage battled for the lead as shock tailed closely behind, followed by bitter resentment. Why, he thought savagely, why wouldn't she tell me this? Nate's fist clenched and unclenched. It took him a moment, but he managed to rein in his anger. Once he could think rationally, he rushed out of the office. He wasn't going to wait any longer. 5 years? He had waited long enough. Mikey, honey, who were you talking to? Mia stepped out the bathroom and glanced over at her son. She could have sworn she heard muffled voices coming from the room. At first, she had thought it was the television, but she recognized her son's voice. Mikey rushed to hide his hand behind his back and looked down. Mia walked over to the bed. Give it to me, she demanded, holding out her hand. He handed her the cell phone, still avoiding her gaze. She grabbed the phone from his small hand. Mikey, look at me. What did I tell you about playing with my phone? That is not a toy, he mumbled quietly, and it's for emergencies only. But it was an emergency, Mommy. I was bored to death. She sighed. Where are your toys? He shrugged. She went to their bags, lying them on the second double bed, and realized she had left a small bag of toys in the car. Well, she wouldn't bother with it now. It had been a long, exhausting drive to Chicago, which included the stops she had made so they could eat and stretch their legs. Once they had made it into the city, Mikey had become moody from the long drive, and Mia had just wanted to collapse. The hard, springy hotel bed, however, had not been inviting. Actually, nothing in the drafty motel room had been welcoming. She managed to overlook the dingy walls and furniture while she sanitized the small hotel room and bathroom as best she could. With a bath and a light snack, her son had lost his tantrum, and she had finally been able to indulge in a nice long shower. The thought of calling Nate had crossed her mind and had been tempting, but she wasn't prepared to face him tonight. She would do it tomorrow when she had gotten some sleep and her nerves had settled some. She replayed the scenario in her head for the umpteenth time and still couldn't think of a way to approach him. She couldn't just blurt out, "Hi, Nate, this is Mikey, your 4-year-old son. And by the way, we need money." She scoffed and shook her head. Then again, maybe I should call him right now and get it over with. As if on cue, her cell phone rang. It was Nate. Yet instead of the cool lightheartedness she had received last night, he was curt and abrupt. "What room are you in?" She frowned. "What?" "I'm at the motel," he said, a hard edge in his voice. Her stomach dropped, panic seized her, and she stood frozen in the middle of the room. She was not prepared for this, but she had no doubt that he would bang on every door until he found her. "What room are you staying in?" "Room 238, she finally whispered. "I'm coming up." He ended the call before she had a chance to say anything else. "Mommy, I almost forgot," Mikey said, jarring her out of her trance. "A man called for you." Mia turned to her son, who was now using the hotel pens and notepads to draw with. "What man?" Deep down, though, Mia knew Nate's sudden appearance couldn't be a coincidence. Mikey shrugged as a hard knock came at the motel door. They both stared toward the direction of the sound. Mia walked to the door, each step as heavy as the beating of her heart. "Who is it?" She felt like a fool for asking. She knew who stood behind that door. "It's me." Nate's muffled voice held an edge that immediately had her draw her back up. She opened the door and was unnerved by her reaction to him. Nate had always been handsome, but now that didn't seem adequate to describe him. His hard jaw and sensual lips were set in stern, stubborn lines, and his rich, dark brown hair was cut stylishly. His tall, once lean frame was broader than she remembered and was covered in dark slacks, a silken button-down shirt, and a dark blazer. She didn't miss the way his dark, deep-set eyes ran down the length of her. Her face flushed at the heated once-over. The man standing before her, filling the doorway appeared untouchable. No, he was too striking for mere handsomeness. "May I come in?" His low whisper held all the seductive qualities she remembered. She slightly shook her head, breaking the hypnotic spell she found herself under and steeling herself against the cosmic effect he still had on her. And this time she had to make sure her heart was protected from him. Without a word, she stepped back to let him in. The motel room wasn't spacious, and with his presence, it appeared even less so. Nate stopped in the middle of the room and stared down at their son, who was also looking up at him with newfound curiosity. Mia didn't know what to say to break the heavy silence as father and son stared at each other, but the tension was killing her. "Mikey, baby, come say hi." He scrambled off the bed and walked toward them. Mikey wasn't normally shy, but for some reason, he wasn't exhibiting his usual braziness. When he stood directly in front of Nate, he held out his small hand. "Hi, mister," he murmured. Mia's heart broke a little at the awkward situation she had placed them in. "This is my fault. A son should know his father, but because of her selfishness, Her son was now greeting his father like a stranger. With a gentle smile, Nate crouched down and took the small hand offered to him. "Hi, Mikey. We spoke on the phone earlier, remember?" Mikey nodded. Nate leaned over and whispered something in his ear. Mia couldn't hear what he was saying, but she picked up something about dirt. Whatever it was, it made her son scrunch his face and nod. "I told you," Mikey said, giggling. "Yes, you did," Nate agreed. "Why don't you go finish drawing while I talk to your mom?" Nate rose to his full height as Mikey ran back to the bed. "How old is he?" Mia didn't look at him when she replied. "He turned 4 this January." Nate continued watching Mikey, then said in a deceptively mild tone, "He's mine, isn't he?" It was more a statement than a question. He turned to face her when she didn't respond, and she was taken aback by the rage and hurt that simmered in his dark eyes. There was nothing she could say, nothing she could do that would soothe those raw feelings. She simply looked back at their son and nodded. His son. Nate's heart twisted as he looked at the little boy whose small features were a unique blend of his and Mia's. Mikey had her wide eyes and the MacArthur's stubborn chin, though it was soft with youth. Nate had used the time during his drive here to get his shock and temper under control, but he was still reeling with the realization that he was a father. He turned his attention to Mia, who stood beside him, carefully avoiding his gaze. She looked beautifully tragic with her hair pulled back in a loose bun at her nape. Her large dark eyes eclipsed her smooth, angular face. Even in her simple gray skirt and white cami, his sexual attraction to her was unwavering. Motherhood had filled her out nicely. Even now, with all her lies and secrets, he still wanted her. Right now wasn't the time to think about that, however. They needed to talk, but first he needed to get them out of this blank motel room. "Get your things," he said curtly. "Why?" He moved closer to her and said in a low voice so Mikey wouldn't overhear, "I said, get your things. You two aren't staying here tonight." Her eyes widened in surprise. Then she swiftly glanced away. "Look, I know there's a lot for us to discuss, but you got that right," he snapped. "And tonight, we're going to. Just not in this blank." He read the protest in her eyes and stopped her before she could say anything else. His patience was already stretched thin. "Don't argue with me right now," he said through gritted teeth. "Just get your things." An hour later, they finally made it to his high-rise apartment. Mia had forgotten how terrible the traffic was in Chicago, especially on a Friday night. She now carried a sleeping Mikey into the condo as Nate brought in their bags. When he turned on the lights, Mia was stunned by the luxury that greeted her. The high ceilings and rich dark wood floors held beautifully decorated artwork with modern furniture that was as untouchable as the man. The abstract artwork decorating the white walls resembled something out of an art gallery, but they complemented the stylish, elegant decor. Large windows at the far end of the spacious apartment overlooked the city and here added to the condo's grandeur. From the large windows, the sun painted the sky in a dark orange glow as dusk began to descend. Mia had only been to his apartment once while they had been dating, but this was certainly new. Nate had been careful in keeping a casual, rather modest appearance around her. Now, looking at him, There was nothing casual about the tall, composed man standing before her. Uncertainty ate at her as she realized for the first time how far outside her domain she was. How could she just come out and ask for money without looking like an opportunist? She immediately quelled the feeling. It was too late to turn back. She came here for a purpose and would see it through. Her sleeping son began to weigh heavily in her tired arms, and Mia turned to Nate, who had been silently watching her survey his apartment. "Where can I put him?" she asked in a low voice. He nodded behind her. "There's a guest room in the back. Come on, I'll show you." She followed him down the hall to the first door on the left. It was a small, simple bedroom with a single bed, nightstand, and dresser. Nate turned on the lamp as she gently placed Mikey on the bed. He didn't stir once. She changed him into his pajamas and sat beside him on the bed, rubbing his back. Mikey was normally a heavy sleeper, but tonight had been especially wearing for him with the drive and all. She herself was exhausted, but still had a long night ahead of her. She tried to put it off by hiding out in here with her son, but with the determined look on Nate's face, that wouldn't happen. "Is he okay?" She turned around to find him standing in the doorway. He had removed his blazer and stood there looking completely relaxed, with the first two buttons of his pale blue shirt undone. She nodded, glancing back down at her sleeping son. "He's just tired," she whispered. "We had a long drive." Nate walked slowly into the room and looked down at Mikey with gentle yet watchful eyes. The look on his hard face tugged at her heart. Confusion and guilt began to shape in her. "I should have told him." "Come on," he whispered, holding out his hand to her. "It's time we talk." She let out a ragged breath. She didn't want to go anywhere with him, not out of fear, because she knew in her heart he would never become violent with her. But his nearness was too much for her frayed emotions. She was too tired to resurrect any mental or emotional defenses against them tonight. He was angry, that much was clear, even though he tried to hide it behind cool, unreadable eyes. She didn't have the energy to deal with a heated confrontation tonight, yet he deserved some answers, and from his unwavering stance, he wouldn't be put off. She sent another glance down at Mikey, then she let out a small sigh. She placed her hand in his, and he immediately closed his fingers around hers, pulling her up off the bed. He led her into the living room, and Mia concentrated on everything but the warm, rough hand that held hers. When they neared the sofa, she immediately pulled away from him, even though she still tingled where he had touched. She took the nearest seat, keeping her eyes averted as she willed her nerves to settle. He said nothing as he sat across from her and ran his hand through his hair repeatedly, an indication of his own agitation. "Why didn't you tell me?" Despite his cool, steady gaze, his voice was harsh and grating. His angry confusion only intensified her mounting guilt. "I should have," she said quietly, "but then I didn't think it would have made any difference." "What do you mean?" "Of course it would have made a blank difference. You said you didn't want kids, remember? And I didn't want to be with someone who didn't want me or my child." She looked down at her hands, unnerved by the intensity in his dark eyes. "I figured I'd let you off the hook." After a short, painful silence, he asked, "So what's changed? Why tell me now?" Is that all he has to say? Well, what did you expect him to say? That he hadn't meant what he said? that if he could do it all again, he would marry you and make you a big happy family. She shook her head, disgusted with herself. Despite her cold encounter with reality, she was still a romantic fool. She took a deep, shaky breath and gave herself a hard mental shake. I'm here because I need your help. She went on to tell him about the upcoming foreclosure and the limited time frame in which she had to make the payment. How much is owed? He asked when she finished, his expression even more stoic, more unreadable. She told him the amount. He didn't even bat an eye. The amount she was asking for Mia would cover the mortgage and take care of Mikey for the next 12 months while she looked for permanent work. And she told him all this, wanting to be completely transparent with him. The last thing I wanted was to come to you for this, she continued. But I had nowhere else to turn. You're my last resort in making sure Mikey has a home, and I promise you'll never hear from me again. Nate leaned forward in his seat, holding her gaze with his. Tell me, he says, he began softly, if you didn't need the money, would you have ever told me about him? Mia didn't know how to answer him. She looked down at her hands, not knowing how to best respond. She wanted to think she eventually would have, but she had been so caught up with her own emotional turmoil, wanting nothing to do with him. She couldn't be sure. He sat back in his seat. I guess I have my answer. Her eyes flew up to his. Nate, I'm not here for child support if that's what you're thinking. His eyes flashed for a second there, rage and pain in them, even he couldn't conceal. She had to look away. You've made it clear why you're here, but that doesn't matter to me right now. What matters is that I have a 4-year-old son who doesn't even know who I am. Mia was already consumed with guilt. She didn't need Nate making her feel worse than she did already. Yes, she should have told him about Mikey, but how dare he pretend as if being a father had mattered to him before? Don't you dare make me out to be the bad guy here, she said sharply. You didn't want the responsibility, and I wasn't going to force you into it. I'm not going to have my child feeling abandoned like you made me feel after you left, she thought. Those words, however, were kept hidden in the deepest part of her. Just because I didn't want kids doesn't mean I would have turned my back on the one that I have, he snapped. He's my son, too. You should have told me about him. His words bit out, but barely suppressed rage. Mia placed her fingers on her temples, trying to soothe the headache pulsating there. Yes, I admit I should have. I'm sorry. But that doesn't change the fact that I have him to worry about now. And if you really care, then you'll help us keep our place. He glared at her, saying nothing. She knew an apology would not make up for what she had done, but she didn't know what else he wanted her to say. Mommy? They both started at the small voice coming from across the room. Neo was the first to repeat, yes, baby? I have to potty. She turned to Nate. I'll take him, he said, brushing her past her. A few minutes later, they both came back to the living room where she still sat. And animated Mikey was going a mile a minute as Nate paid close attention to their son's excited chatter. When Mikey finally noticed her, he came running to her side. Mommy, guess what? She smiled down at his excited face. What? I have a daddy, he exclaimed. Mia's eyes shot up to Nate's. Someone had to tell him, Nate said with a shrug. Mia brought her attention back to Mikey, but couldn't stop the moisture that gathered in her eyes. That's right, you do, Mia said with a soft smile. Can I keep him? Please? The tears that clogged her throat. She didn't trust herself to speak. Instead, she placed a quick kiss on his forehead and brought him up to her lap. Yes, of course, she whispered thickly, avoiding the dark gaze that bored into her from across the room. Nate watched the excited energy that boiled over his son's little body and livened up his quiet condo. He glanced over at Mia, who watched their son with calm patience. There was still a lot for them to discuss, but tonight he'd let it rest, partly because of the fatigue etched on her face, and partly because he still needed to digest and process everything. He was a father. That knowledge was something he was still getting used to. He had always been careful to protect himself and the woman he was with. With Mia, however, their lovemaking had always been wild, intense. It could be the reason why their birth control hadn't been effective. If Mikey's birth was in January, that meant he had gotten her pregnant around April. In Galena, memories of that week came flooding to him. It had been a nice getaway from the city, one he had been disappointed to see end. Before the trip, he had spent weeks traveling across the country for his own company and at his father's request. Not being able to see or touch her had been frustrating. He never made a big thing about his birthday, but Mia had wanted to do something special for his big 3-0, and he could think of nothing better than to hide away somewhere with her where they could eat, relax, and make love. He had rented a vacation home for 1 week. They had lived in their own private oasis. They had spent the days enjoying the quiet country scenery, and the nights had been unforgettable. They couldn't get enough of each other. She had been as wild as he, clawing at his back, rising up to meet his heavy thrusts. They had sweated and panted and had gotten as close as two bodies could possibly get. Nate shifted to hide his body's reaction at the still vivid memory. Sometime during that week, they had made Mikey. Though he still struggled between his anger and his unwavering lust for her, he had no regrets. Together they had created another life. Though he couldn't accept or excuse her decision to keep Mikey from him, he couldn't ignore his role in making her feel as if she had to. Mm. Daddy? Nate instantly jerked at the name. Though it wasn't an unpleasant sound, it was something that would take some getting used to. Yes, buddy? Can I have some juice? He looked helplessly at Mia. He didn't think he had any. He didn't entertain much in his apartment and was certainly not equipped to entertain kids as young as Mikey, or guests of any age for that matter. He didn't even keep liquor in his apartment anymore. Not that he didn't enjoy a drink on occasion, but after their breakup, he had found himself indulging in the mind-numbing liquid too frequently. Fortunately, he had ended that bad habit before it had gotten a chance to permanently root itself in his life. He now had a personal rule to only drink socially, never alone, and never at home. I don't think I have any. Nate checked his watch. If he left now, he could probably pick up some. It's all right, she said with a soft smile of understanding. I think I have a juice box in one of my tote bags. She got up and fished through a large yellow and brown bag that had been left in the foyer. She still wore the light sweater she had put on over the white cami, yet it did little to conceal her lush curves hidden underneath. She walked back to where they sat and handed Mikey a green and red juice carton. Tomorrow we can go shopping for groceries, Nate said, watching Mikey suck on the red liquid. Nate couldn't stop looking at him. It felt too surreal, looking at this little person who was part of him. Thanks, but that's not necessary, she whispered. We're not staying long. Irritation at her dismissive words rose in him, but he shoved it down. He didn't want to start another argument tonight, especially not in front of Mikey. There would be time tomorrow to hash this out. We'll figure that out later, he replied. Her attention was momentarily stolen away when Mikey handed her the juice carton, so she didn't argue. Hmm. Excuse me. Didn't she ask, grabbing the carton? At his vigorous nod, she placed it on the center table and stood up. Okay, then, she said. Hold out your hand. Time for bed. But, Mommy, I'm not tired. Mikey continued to whine, pout, and protest as Mia ushered him back to the guest room. Nate watched the whole scene with fascination and mild amusement. He knew a handful of people with children and didn't spend a whole lot of time with them, so he could only imagine the patience needed to deal with that kind of energy. The way Mia was handling their son seemed to come naturally. She was gentle yet stern, loving but still firm. Something in him warmed at the sight. He had never experienced that with his own parents, certainly never his mother. Was it something that came naturally to Mia as a mother? Could he be that kind of father to Mikey? The thought jarred him. He didn't know where or why it had surfaced, but he realized he wanted to be the kind of father to Mikey his father had never been to him. He wanted to be a good father to the little boy whose young features closely resembled his. Nate wanted Mikey in his life. Mia came back to where he sat, drawing his attention from his new yet exhilarating thoughts. He leaned down to grab the empty juice carton and glanced. She leaned down to grab the empty juice carton and glanced over at him. Where can I toss this? He stood. I'll throw it out. He reached for the carton, then drew it back. Blank! A stream of red juice squirted from the thin straw and landed on the front of his shirt. Her eyes widened with horror. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. It's fine, he assured her. Here, let me take that so it doesn't drip everywhere. He went to the kitchen and dumped the remaining juice in the sink. Mia was close behind him, and before he realized what she was doing, she wet a kitchen towel and began dabbing at the red stains on his shirt. He wouldn't have he wouldn't have minded her touch if it had been focused on him and not the shirt. I'm so sorry, she said again, her slender face filled with mortification. Mia is fine. It was an accident, one he had actually caused. He hadn't realized until it was too late that there was still juice left inside the small carton when he had grabbed at it. She continued blotting at the stain until water soaked through, and the stains were now a faint pink. He grabbed her hand to stop her frantic dabbing. It's just a shirt, he whispered. I know, it looks expensive. It's not, he lied, wanting to erase the agitation from her eyes. Besides, he continued with a small grin. It'll wash. If not, I'll just buy a new one. She visibly relaxed, then glanced away, nodding. Her nearness started to wreak havoc on his senses. Her fresh, sweet scent was an erotic tease. He unconsciously tightened his hand over hers. At the small action, her eyes widened, then flew up to his. He ignored the surprised confusion on her face. Instead, he focused on her wide, full lips. He remembered their soft sweetness and wanted to taste them again. Driven by a force stronger than his own willpower, Nate leaned down. She jerked away from him, then stepped back, effectively bringing him back to reality. He cursed himself silently as his regret and frustration strained from his against his slacks. The last thing he needed to do was complicate their situation with lust. Sorry, he murmured roughly. With her back turned to him, she nodded, saying nothing. You must be tired, he said. Why don't you take the back bedroom at the end of the hall? She fidgeted with the towel in her hand, then placed it on the counter, still not looking at him. That's okay, I'll sleep with Mikey. The bed in the other room is bigger and you'll be more comfortable. He proposed but didn't mention it was actually his bedroom, as it would have only increased her obvious discomfort. Besides, why disturb him when there's plenty of space for us to spread out? She didn't argue with him, and he suspected fatigue and weariness must be weighing on her. As Nate lay awake on the sofa, his thoughts were filled with the woman sleeping in his bed, the woman who had borne him a son. It occurred to him that it was already too late. Things between them had gone beyond complicated. Okay, and that is it for tonight. We will pick this up tomorrow and find out what happens. Now that he knows he has a son and he's 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 has some mixed feelings, okay? Because he never expected to have any children. He made that abundantly clear from the beginning. But he has a son and he has some feelings for this little boy that he's only just met. So we are going to find out what's going to happen. Is he going to let her take his son back to Detroit? Or is he going to insist that the boy spend some time with him and let her go back? Or is he going to maybe ask them both to stay? We'll find out tonight when we come back to finish up this story. No, we won't finish it up because there's more than 100 pages left in the story, but we'll get a good grasp of it. And oh, I said tonight, I meant Monday night. Sorry, I forgot. This is Saturday night, and I'm off Sunday nights. Um, what I could do, and what I think I will do, but I'm not going to promise, because I kind of like to get into my watching church services and things like that. So I'm not going to promise, but maybe I will read and post this up, okay, on YouTube. I just might do that. Yeah, I just might do that. So if you have the opportunity, check it out. Look for LaWanna's channel over on YouTube and see if I have it up there. Yeah, that would be nice. I'll get the other one up there too. I should have put it up already. I've been fussing with other things. All right, that is the end for now, and we are going to call it for the night. I do want my hug. Gotta have my hug. All right, thank you. I'm so happy that you were here and you obviously stayed awake this time.
Oh, yes. And it was a wonderful story. I just love it.
Yeah, it's always exciting. It was so much like my story, you know.
Yes,
Uh,
yes, I can relate.
yeah, I did not tell the I was well, I didn't tell the guy for a different reason. I didn't tell him
Hmm.
because I found out that he was engaged to someone else the time that
What?
he was seeing me. I didn't know he was seeing it. I didn't know he was seeing anyone else, let alone engaged to someone else.
Oh, that had to
That's a
break your
line I
heart.
don't cross.
Oh,
I
that had to break your
somebody
heart.
else's guy. And
Yes,
so as soon as I found out, I broke it off.
of
And
course.
uh, then when I realized that I was in the family way, I chose not to tell him. And a few months later, he found out and he asked, and I told him, no, it's not yours.
Oh, so he never knew Miss Parker?
No, he found out 16 years later. I don't think he really believed me because of who I was. He didn't think I was playing around. I think he
Mm-hmm.
just went ahead and accepted it because it made it easier for him, I think. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know
Right.
that. But 16 years later, my son wanted to meet him.
Mm-hmm.
I had my dad get a hold of him, and they met at my dad's place. I wasn't even there. My son said he wanted to go by himself. So
Mm-hmm.
put him on the bus and he went down to San Diego. And my dad said I should have hit a camera. He said it was just so touching and moving. I mean, they hit it off. They
Oh,
really did.
good.
And I was so glad because 7 years later, my son was killed in a car accident.
Right.
So I'm glad they had that opportunity. But yeah, I did the same as her. I kept it to myself. I figured I can take care of my own baby.
Yeah,
Only
and
he
you did. That's
so
right. You were a woman of integrity. Oh, I so
mhm,
respect you.
yeah. So it was ah, and I felt like her too. I mean, I was they put that baby in my arms. Oh my gosh, I couldn't stop looking
Yes,
at him.
I know.
And
No.
I breastfed him for
Mm-hmm.
how long? I breastfed him for about 3 days, and I got this really high fever. And
Mm.
my mother said you better not because the milk might be spoiled or something. Rather than say,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I said, well, the fever will go away. The fever didn't go away; it just kept getting worse and worse. And my mother was
Mm.
saying, you need to go back to the doctor to see what's going on. And I
Mm-hmm.
kept saying, it's gonna be okay, Mom. I'm all right. Well, I hit my baby on that Sunday. By Friday, my mother, when she touched my forehead, I was so
Mm.
hot. My mother said, no arguments. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
back to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And and you know what was the killing thing is I hit my baby in General Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And LA, I don't know if they still show that picture because it looked like it's a little different. But when General Hospital first came on the air, the picture of General Hospital that they showed was the exact the way the General Hospital looked in East LA.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Oh.
But anyway, when I get there and they tell my mother tells them what's wrong. So they put me on a gurney and put me in the hallway, and I fell asleep. At least I
Mm.
think I fell asleep. Like maybe I passed out. I don't know. I
Mm-hmm.
only know the next time I opened my eyes, we left at 8 o'clock that morning. And next time I opened my eyes, it was 3 in the morning.
Wow.
Mother was sitting in a chair by my bed. And when she heard me move, she woke up. And I asked, why were we here? And she was trying to tell me what had happened. What happened was when they delivered my baby, they didn't get out all the afterbirth.
Oh
And
my
instead
God.
of an infection in me.
Mm, mm, mm.
And that
Thank
next
God for
day,
your mother.
yeah, they really have to be careful about that. But that next day, when the doctor came around to check on me, he said, "You are one lucky lady." I said,
Mm-hmm.
"Why?" He said, "Because if your mother had not made you come into the hospital, you
Mm,
wouldn't be here today."
mm, mm,
That's how
mm.
close I came to not being here.
Yes, ma'am.
Hmm.
Lord have mercy. Mm.
Yeah. So anyway, that was
He's a miracle.
that was my story. So a lot of what I was reading there, I was relating to
You
her,
definitely.
and
Yes.
just identified with that.
Yes. And it's a great story. And I certainly hope he accepts his responsibilities, and they can make amends for the baby's sake.
Well, I think he will because he's already feeling awe. He's in awe that this
Hmm.
little person features him so much, you know?
Yes.
And so, and the little kid, yeah, I mean, who could not be happy with a little kid who's excited that you're his dad,
Right.
you know?
Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yes.
so I think it's going to work out, but we'll find out for sure what's going to happen.
Okay.
We got over 100 pages, so you know there's going to be some up and downs in there. We'll find out
Oh,
what
yes, of
is,
course.
yeah, what something's got to happen. Because there's his
Yeah.
dad. That's right, his dad.
Hmm.
His dad didn't like her. How is he going to feel when he finds out not only is she back in town, but she's in town with a little boy that is supposed to be his grandchild? How is he going to accept that?
He has no choice now.
So, oh
Yes.
my gosh. Anyway, so I still want my hug. So
Oh,
your arm around yourself and pretend it's me giving you a big old hug.
oh,
Mm-mm-mm.